Hello and welcome. I am Rosanna Lockwood. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. At least 9 people killed in a second wave of personal electronics explosions in Lebanon. As this time, walkie-talkies in Hezbollah's communications network are targeted a day after pager explosions killed at least 12. Multiple reports attributing the extraordinary operation to Mossad, but Israel's military declining to comment or accept responsibility. Hezbollah vowing revenge and, quote, another reckoning that will come. Elsewhere, senior political voices warning Israel could be pushing the whole Middle East to the brink of regional conflict. Well, at least 12 people have died in a new series of explosions involving personal electronics in Lebanon. This follows a wave of pager explosions across the country yesterday that killed at least 12, including 2 children, and injured thousands. Earlier today, Lebanon's foreign ministry condemning what it's describing as an Israeli cyber attack. While Israel's not directly addressed the events, its military released a statement indicating the chief of staff has been meeting with commanders to discuss readiness for both offensive and defensive actions across all fronts. Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio now by INEGMA's founder and chief executive officer and the former Middle East bureau chief for Defence News, the largest selling international defence publication, Riad Kahwaji. Sir, good to see you this evening in the studio. And look, a second wave of attacks. Would anybody have been able to anticipate that so soon after yesterday?
Not really, but it's no longer surprising. The scale of the attack yesterday, which is unprecedented, has made what happened today look a bit smaller scale. Nevertheless, yes, it's a surprise that to find out that the breach within Hezbollah's security is larger than anticipated. It's not just the pagers, it is now the walkie-talkies. So is there a massive supply chain breach for Hezbollah? Is there one of their suppliers is it the same supplier who provided the pagers, helped facilitate the import of these walkie-talkies? There's a lot of question marks, but definitely this is a massive disruption to Hezbollah's communication infrastructure between the pagers, which initially Hezbollah deployed to replace the cellular phones, because Hezbollah regarded that the mobile phones were used by Israel to track and assassinate a lot of its leaders, and that's why they banned the use of the cellular phones and distributed these pagers. Now these pagers exploded yesterday, and today we have walkie-talkies, so we can imagine that it's like wreaking havoc to Hezbollah's communication infrastructure.
Absolutely. And in terms of the intention of the attacks, I mean, surely one of them is to get rid of all communications amongst Hezbollah operatives. But in another sense, is there a strategy to strike fear? What do you think the strategy is here?
Definitely, it is causing chaos. This is the actual strategy. You have now chaos along Hezbollah's ranks. How they're going to be communicating, the command and control infrastructure is definitely undermined by what happened. They are now guessing which devices could be rigged. Is there any more devices that are rigged? Now they definitely are reviewing all what they have of communication devices, trying to replace them, trying to replace those. The people, you have a manpower. We're talking about 3,000 people yesterday, like 300 today, who were injured. Many of them now are out of action. So you have a major manpower shortage that happened within 24 hours that Hezbollah has to come up with. At the time, they're anticipating a possible massive attack by Israel, a land offensive, possible with a larger scale war. So all of this is having a major psychological impact on the Hezbollah leadership and members right now on the ground in Lebanon, definitely.
Certainly. And in terms of your expertise as a defense expert for many, many years now, have you ever considered seeing something like this happening? Is this completely unprecedented?
No. We're seeing now like fourth, fifth generation warfare come into shape, where we see the non-kinetic sort of attacks. But now it is not just stealing information, disrupting communication. It is now actually killing, exploding devices, in this way. It's taken it to a whole new level. This is like Hollywood, James Bond level style of operations carried out by the Israeli Mossad, which is really something here. But at the same time, we're going to have a lot of issues with the communications companies now, because it has given them a bad reputation. Everybody has been looking at his phone now, his pager. Could this be rigged or so forth, especially with the military now, who deal with pagers or cell phones or so forth, will all now be looking at it differently after what we saw in Lebanon today and yesterday.
Absolutely. Look, in terms of Israel being behind this, that's what's alleged. It's reported widely, but it's not Israel's style generally to report on its foreign operations abroad, whether it's intelligence or Mossad. How much certainty is there that it is Israel or Mossad behind this?
If you look at the Israeli media, they're all saying it is us. I mean, there's a single Israeli news outlet that is not admitting it is an Israeli attack. But definitely Israel officially is not going to be claiming this for the obvious reasons. They're using civilian devices, and there are civilian casualties. Yesterday there were kids among the casualties, little children in Lebanon. So definitely they're not going to be claiming this. But today the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, inferred. So in a way he said that we're seeing a new phase of this war. And we are preparing and seeing a new phase, a new chapter in the war right now unfolding in northern Israel, towards Hezbollah. So some people took this as indirect admission that, yes, it was us, we did this, and there is more to come, that this is just a start. Even today, the chief of staff said there's a lot of weapons that we have not used. Again, this could be psychological warfare, and this could be also preparing us for more things are yet to come, and what Israel has prepared to use in its anticipated showdown with Hezbollah.
And what you're describing there couldn't be anything short of escalation, even if we see more Israeli attacks. But Hezbollah, for their part, have vowed revenge and recrimination as well. What could that look like?
I think Hezbollah is trying to restrain itself. Hezbollah is under pressure from Iran not to fall in Israel's trap and go in and move in a way that would justify Israeli going in a full-scale war. Iran does not want to get into a war and does not want to see Hezbollah go into a full-scale war that could end up degrading considerably Hezbollah's capability. We know Hezbollah's importance to Iran. So anticipation is that the retaliation from Hezbollah will be something similar to what we saw last month in the retaliating against the assassination of its military commander, Fuad Shukr. It could be something at that scale, could be a bit bigger, but I doubt that Hezbollah is going to go to something very huge that will give Israel the alibi to go all out. Is going to try to keep it restrained to avoid going in a full-scale war.
Look, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Cairo today talking about efforts to try and secure a ceasefire deal in Gaza with other parties as well. He was asked about these attacks, these pager attacks, and he said the US was not aware of the attacks. Do you think Israel would have informed someone like the US?
There has been many precedents whereby Israel did not inform the U.S. about its actions, or usually they will let them know an hour before, a very short time before the incident itself. First, they don't want to come under pressure to stop what they're about to do, and second, to reduce the information, line of information, so that there will not be any leaks. So usually they either don't inform or they wait until like an hour before the event before they relay the information that something is about to happen in Lebanon, that we are about to carry out a major attack inside Lebanon without giving further details, just to prepare them psychologically, or if they need to take precautions with the embassy in Lebanon, with any U.S. Officials or personnel inside Lebanon, just to take precautions in case of retaliation.
It's been very informative speaking to you and getting your expertise. Riad Kahwaji. Thank you very much. Well, earlier on Tuesday, before the attack, Israel's Security Cabinet had stated one of their official goals of the Gaza war is to ensure the safe return of some 60,000 residents displaced in the north by Hezbollah attacks. Israel's defense minister previously saying the only way would be through military action. Our correspondent Sarah Coates is live in Tel Aviv for us. Sarah, thank you. If indeed Israel was behind these waves of explosions of personal electronics, is there a sense that this will get them closer to or further from that goal of bringing those displaced people in the north back?
Well, this is certainly something that's been widely spoken about here in Israel over these past few months. Residents of the north have been absolutely furious, really, at the way that they've been treated by the Israeli government. They have been demanding a change to the status quo. They've been demanding that these Hezbollah fighters are pushed further back behind the Litani River so that they can go home. They have not been home now for 11 months. And as you mentioned, we are talking here more than 60,000 people. And it was only 48 hours ago that Israel actually changed these war goals to add that, returning these residents back home north. Although after these string of attacks yesterday and also over the last few hours, it does remain unclear as to how these people will get back, given what is happening on the ground. Now, we have heard from Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He's been touring an airbase about 100 kilometres north of where I am, just a little further south of Haifa. He came out to say we're entering a new phase of the war. The focus has now moved to the northern front. Now, there was also confirmation earlier today that the IDF's 98th Battalion, this is the paratroopers that have been recently serving in Gaza. They finished up there a few weeks ago, but they are now being redeployed to the north. So this is, of course, very, very worrying, especially what we're seeing on the ground in Lebanon. We're hearing from the Lebanese Health Ministry that this latest wave of attacks targeting a number of places across the country has injured at least 300 people, killed another 9, and Hezbollah is vowing retribution. And what we can expect tomorrow is an address from the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, speaking out. So that is certainly something that we will be watching very, very closely amid this, once again, major escalation.
Yeah, and look, Sarah, we understand that Israeli military and intelligence authorities haven't officially claimed responsibility for this wave of explosion attacks across Lebanon and Syria. However, there's a lot of fingers being pointed at it being Israel behind it. So have you been speaking to people in Tel Aviv, Israelis? What do they think about all of this?
I certainly have, and it's certainly a bizarre situation, a surreal situation. I'm not sure if my mic is actually picking up these sounds from a few hundred metres behind me. Loud music, people partying on the beach. There's a big event there happening people here, they're not really talking about this latest wave of attacks. This morning, there were many memes circulating on social media, people kind of laughing about these attacks, you could say, in Lebanon yesterday. And today, really, a lot of people were actually unaware that this latest wave of attacks has happened. But once again, this is extremely concerning. Not much talk about it here on the ground in Tel Aviv, but certainly this is a major concern for these northern residents. There's been no change to the IDF's home front command advice, although a number of municipalities up in these largely evacuated northern regions, they're advising residents there to stay very, very close to shelter, of course, amid fear of retaliation.
Yeah, let's talk about that retaliation, the concerns of it. Is there a sense there about the scale or size of this retribution that has been promised by Hezbollah?
Well, certainly this remains unclear, but what we do need to remember here is that these attacks yesterday and also this fresh wave of attacks today inside Lebanon has severely denigrated Hezbollah's not only communications pyramid there, but also its military structure. So it potentially will take Hezbollah a bit of time to recoup from these attacks. It's unclear if any more are on the horizon, but of course, people in Lebanon are on high alert. So in addressing that, it is yet to be seen as to what this retaliation could look like. But in the past, especially after the assassination of Fuad Shakur, he was, of course, the senior Hezbollah military commander. We saw that massive barrage of rockets and drones sent toward Israel, so we could certainly see something like this. But, of course, this is an escalation, so potentially what could happen is something larger. It's still unclear as to what this may be, but we have been hearing from Israeli officials, they've been saying over these past few weeks, past few months even, that they are ready for any scenario, also threatening to turn Beirut into another Gaza.
Sarah Coates speaking to us live from Tel Aviv this evening. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has announced the kingdom will not recognise Israel without a Palestinian state and strongly condemned the crimes of the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people. Quote, "The kingdom will not stop its tireless work towards the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and we affirm that the kingdom will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel without that." Elsewhere, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Cairo today, where he held talks with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, as well as reaffirming his commitment to a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Telling reporters the US had no prior knowledge of Tuesday's deadly attacks across Lebanon and Syria, which targeted pages used by Hezbollah.
To Lebanon, the United States did not know about, nor was it involved in these incidents, and we're still gathering the information and gathering the facts. Broadly speaking, we've been very clear, and we remain very clear, about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza, to see it spread to other fronts. It's clearly not in the interest of anyone involved to see that happen, and that's why, again, it's imperative that all parties refrain from any actions that could escalate the conflict.
Let's return now to those comments, that statement made by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman today, announcing the kingdom will not recognise Israel without a Palestinian state and strongly condemning, quote, the crimes of the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people. For more on this, I'm now joined from Ramallah by the Deputy Secretary General of Fatah Central Committee, Sabri Sadaim. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Talk to us about what that statement from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia means for Palestinians.
Well, good evening to you. It's good to be with you. Let me say that this is a step in the right direction. It's most appreciated at a critical time, and with the Palestinians suffering what they suffer, it comes as a soothing factor in terms of reaffirming the position of Saudi Arabia and also closing the door to speculations or on speculations that have long said that Saudi will go with the flow and will yield to pressure. Obviously, this is affirming a very affirmative position that the steadfastness of Saudi Arabia is unhindered and that Saudi Arabia at large will never, ever recognize any sort of normalization without any recognition of a Palestinian state to come to being.
It's a very affirmative statement. As you say, let's remind ourselves of the words, quote, "The kingdom will not stop its tireless work towards the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and we affirm that the kingdom will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel without that." Did you expect such a statement from Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince?
Well, judging on the talks that we have held with the Crown Prince, most recent was the visit of President Abu Mazen to Riyadh. This was the position. It needed to be echoed. It needed to be well heard by people, especially on the eve of the vote that has taken place at the General Assembly of the UN in support of the end of occupation and withdrawal of Israeli forces within the coming 12 months. So this comes at the right time. It is the bullseye position, as it were, in terms of reaffirming the position of Saudi Arabia and also speaking loud and clear to everyone who had speculated that Saudi Arabia may yield to pressure. Definitely, Saudi Arabia will not give in to pressure and will continue to support the rights of the Palestinian people until their dreams and aspirations are being recognized.
Yeah, do you expect this statement will make a big difference on the ground there for Palestinians, but also in terms of other leaders and other countries around the world and the geopolitics at play?
Indeed, because there has been in the past this pressure that's been exerted on everyone by saying, Saudi Arabia, your biggest ally, is going to normalize and the Palestinians will be left behind. Obviously, the Crown Prince and Saudi at large, the king and the entire royal family has behaved very responsibly and has answered all critics and has said quite clearly that normalization will no longer be that sword held against Palestinian necks. If anything, we appreciate such position and we look highly at the prince and the king and the entire kingdom for a position that came at the right.
Deputy Secretary General of Fatah Central Committee, Sabri Said, speaking to us from Ramallah. Thank you. Well, let us get some of the day's other news now from around the world. In the UK, the Princess of Wales has returned to work following the completion of her chemotherapy treatment for cancer. According to a court circular, she attended an early years meeting with members of the royal household at Windsor Castle. Google has won its challenge against a €1.5 billion fine from the EU for blocking rival online search advertisers. The bloc accusing Google of abusing its market dominance by restricting third-party rivals from displaying search adverts between 2006 and 2016. Europe's second top court ruling, the European Commission, which levied the fine, quote, committed errors in its assessment. The Commission saying it would reflect on possible next steps, which could include an appeal to the EU's top court. And the global vaccine group Gavi announcing plans to buy 500,000 doses of an Mpox vaccine from Bavarian Nordic, spending up to $50 million to ensure the doses will be delivered this year. According to the WHO, there's been more than 25,000 suspected Mpox cases and over 700 deaths in Africa, mainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And to the United States now, where the US Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates later on today, the first cut in almost 4 years' time. Now, this comes after several sets of data have shown inflation has cooled and hiring has slowed. Nick Harper reports from Washington.
A cut is coming, but how big is it going to be? The US Federal Reserve's long-anticipated interest rate reduction comes after more than a year of rates in the region of 5.25 to 5.5%. The majority of traders on Wall Street are now predicting a 0.5% reduction. Economists and financial institutions, though, think a 1/4 point cut is more likely.
It kind of blows me away. It's kind of surprising. I don't personally see that in what we've seen unfold in terms of real economic data, real earnings data, even what we've seen in terms of guidance from CEOs. Yes, we've seen some less stellar than hoped for guidance, but not, in my opinion, not enough to justify the Fed coming out, blazing out of the gates with a 50 basis point cut.
Inflation hit post-pandemic highs of 9.1% in June 2022, resulting in 11 rounds of aggressive rate hikes to try and tame soaring prices. US voters say the economy is now their number one concern. Ahead of November's election, both candidates, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, are promising to help bring down costs. And this rate cut could help.
It could give some relief to Main Street. A lot of consumers, unfortunately, are faced with using their credit cards to finance their their household spend with this increased inflation. And so you've got this really high acceleration of credit card balances. Delinquencies are up.
Inflation is now down to around 2.5%, not quite at Fed Chair Jerome Powell's target of 2%. But the economic outlook now appears secure enough to prompt this rate reduction. And it could be the first of several over the coming months as the Fed tries to achieve that desired soft landing, stabilising the economy without triggering the turbulence of a recession. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
A reminder of our top stories. At least 3 people killed in a second wave of personal electronics explosions in Lebanon, as this time walkie-talkies and Hezbollah's communications network are targeted a day after coordinated pager attacks killed at least 12. Multiple reports attributing the extraordinary operation to Mossad, but Israel's military declined to comment or accept responsibility. Hezbollah, though, vowing revenge and, quote, another reckoning that will come. And senior political voices have warned Israel could be pushing the whole Middle East to the brink of regional conflict. That is all we have time for tonight. Coming up next is Riz Khan and what you need to know about Ozempic. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today, continuing on the Lebanon attack story with exclusive insights and special guests.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. As many as 1 billion people around the world are obese. That's a number worth considering for a moment. It amounts to 1 in 8 people walking on planet Earth today. In the US alone, 3 out of every 4 people are obese or overweight. That's 75% of the population. So how did we get to this situation? Are processed foods to blame? How about our increasingly sedentary lifestyles? And what can be done to solve the problem? For millions of people, the answer to that final question is a new generation of weight loss drugs with names such as Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro and Zepbound. Originally created to tackle type 2 diabetes, they've also proved successful in dropping body weight by 15 to 20% and significantly reducing the risk of heart attacks. Self-administered by simple injections, the drugs have been likened by some to a miracle cure. Well, nearly half of all Americans say they want to get their hands on them. But there are downsides too. There's a long list of potential side effects ranging from the uncomfortable to the dangerous. Excess demand for the drugs have led to shortages, which impacts diabetes treatments. Well, the drugs have been misused by some people seeking a quick summer slim down at the risk of harming themselves. And there have been reports of substantial weight regain once people quit the treatment. In this episode, we'll look at the issues from different perspectives, and I'll reveal my own decision on whether or not to use weight loss drugs. Well, my first guest is Johan, a British journalist and author who lost 42 pounds, almost 20 kilos, using Ozempic and Wegovy. He shared his experiences, both good and bad, in his best-selling book, Magic Pill, the extraordinary benefits and disturbing risks of the new weight loss drugs. Johan, thanks for joining us. Now, most of us first heard about Ozempic as this kind of Hollywood drug, the Hollywood set using it to lose weight. Tell me about your story, how you got introduced to it.
I remember so clearly the moment that I learned about the existence of these drugs and how I felt. It was that moment when the pandemic was ending. It was the winter of 2022 and the world was opening up again. And I got invited to a party and I was like, oh yeah, I remember parties. They used to exist. So I agreed to go. And in the Uber on the way there, so this party was thrown by an Oscar-winning actor. I'm not saying that just a name drop. It's relevant to what comes next. But, and I suddenly felt this kind of wave of self-consciousness, right? I was quite fat at the start of the pandemic and I gained a lot of weight during the pandemic. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit embarrassing. And then I remembered that like almost everyone I knew had gained weight during the pandemic. And I suddenly thought, actually, this party is going to be really interesting. I'm going to see a load of like Hollywood stars with a bit of flab on them. This is going to be fascinating. And I arrived and I started walking around and it was the weirdest thing. Not only had they not gained any weight, everyone was gaunt. Like everyone was markedly thinner, and not just the actors, their wives, their agents, the agents' kids, like everyone. And I bumped into a friend of mine on the dance floor and I said to her, wow, looks like everyone really did take up Pilates during lockdown. And she laughed at me and I didn't know why she was laughing. And she pulled up on her phone an image of an Ozempic pen. And I learned then and in the following days that there's been a staggering scientific breakthrough. We now have a new kind of weight loss drug that really does deliver huge amounts of weight loss. The average person taking Ozempic Wegovy loses 15% of their body weight in a year. With Mounjaro, it's 21% of their body weight. And I immediately thought two just completely conflicting things. The first thing I thought was, well, this could save my life. I was about to turn 44, which is the age my grandfather was when he died of a heart attack. Loads of the men in my family get fat, die of heart disease. I knew that obesity causes over 200 medical conditions. But I also thought, this sounds way too good to be true, right? Come on now, can there really be such a thing as a free lunch, right? I guess with Ozempic, it'd be a smaller free lunch. So I used my training in the social sciences at Cambridge University to go on a big journey all over the world to interview the leading experts on these drugs, biggest defenders, the biggest critics, and really figure out what this extraordinary revolution is going to mean for all of us. And that's really the heart of my book, Magic Pill.
So, I mean, tell me about those immediate effects on your body. What actually started to happen? How you started to feel it?
I thought if I'm going to investigate this and write about it, I've got to take these drugs. And again, it was the weirdest thing. I remember it's the second day after I started taking Ozempic, I went to a diner just up the street from where I live when I'm in London. And I went in and I ordered what I used to order for breakfast every morning, which I'm slightly embarrassed to repeat, was a huge chicken roll with loads of mayonnaise in it. And normally I would wolf that down and I would still want some potato chips or something else. And I had like 3 or 4 mouthfuls and I was just full. I didn't want to eat anymore. I was completely baffled. And that was really how it was from then on. I felt really full, really fast. So the way these drugs work is they boost your sense of fullness. I can explain the kind of biological mechanisms more. There's a big debate about them, obviously. But they massively boost your sense of fullness. So it's not like dieting where you're like, which obviously I tried many times in my life, where you're sort of hungry and you learn how to deny yourself. It's not like that. You don't actually want to eat very much. It's a very strange feeling.
Let me ask you about that, because you said it happened within a couple of days. Now, I know other people who are taking it, they've gone under medical supervision and so on, but they actually took weeks to start to feel the effects. And you say you felt it within days.
Yeah, different people, you're right. Different people it kicks in, take a bit longer for some people than it did for me. It happened very quickly. Some people it's almost immediate and some people it takes a couple of weeks. But it has a massive effect on the appetite of everyone who takes it. What's interesting is we know some of what's going on why. So if you ate something now, doesn't matter what it is, after a little while, your pancreas will produce a hormone called GLP-1. GLP-1 is basically part of your body's natural signals saying, hey, you've had enough, stop eating. It's the brakes, basically. But natural GLP-1 only stays around in your system for a few minutes, and then it's washed away. What these drugs do is they inject you with an artificial copy of GLP-1 that instead of sticking around for a few minutes, stays around in your system for a whole week. So it has this effect that when you start to eat, you already feel quite full because you're getting this signal, hey, you've had enough, stop.
I wonder, now obviously when you're feeling full so much more quickly, do you tend to miss the joy of eating food? Do you find that, you don't find that social pleasure that you discussed?
It's a really important question, and I want to answer it by being honest that I'm unusual. So lots of people taking these new weight loss drugs have the experience that you're describing. It's very widespread. They lose the pleasure of food. Indeed, Jens Jules Holst, who's one of the scientists who designed these drugs for Novo Nordisk, said this is just going to, make these drugs untenable in the long term. You can't live if you don't enjoy food. I had the opposite effect. So for me, from when I was a very small child, I realized now looking back on it, I grew up in a very violent and stressful environment. I really, from a very young age, learned to use food to calm myself down. And so I would eat, all my life I've eaten very quickly. And it wasn't really for enjoying the flavor or the taste, it was sort of stuffing myself, right? And stuffing is where you deliberately eat beyond the point of feeling full. We've all done it at some point, And I couldn't do that when I was on these drugs. I literally couldn't do it. So for me, I actually had to slow down my eating. And for me, that actually meant that I started to enjoy eating more. I don't want to overstate it. I'm not some great foodie. But for me, it's actually increased the amount of pleasure that I take in food. But I stress, I do think I'm unusual.
You did indicate, you like a lot of the comfort food, the kind of fried chicken and stuff like that. Now, I wonder, though, has that limitation on how much you can eat changed the kind of foods you eat to give yourself something more delicate, perhaps, or something that is less kind of that type of comfort food?
It's an important question, and I started to think about this because, half of Americans now want to take these drugs, right? People watching, you might think, oh, they haven't arrived here yet. This is about to transform the society in which you live, right? Obesity is, by many measures, the biggest killer in the developed world. We now have a drug that reverses obesity. It's a staggering breakthrough. It'll be as significant a breakthrough as the contraceptive pill or antidepressants. This is a really, really big moment. And when I learned these statistics, looking at the evidence for how many people want to take these drugs, thinking, at first glance, this seems almost crazy. How did we get to this point, right? How did we get to the point where half of us want to drug ourselves to stop us eating so much? It seems so odd. And if you want to think about that, I think the answer to your question, really important question you've asked, lies there. Because I would just say to everyone, right? Everyone watching, just do me a favor. Just take out your phone and Google something for me. Just Google, wherever you live, Google photographs of beaches in the place where you lived in 1979, the year that I was born, and just look at them on the internet for a moment, right? If you've done that, you would have noticed something really weird. When you look at, for example, I'm, as you can tell from my weird Downton Abbey accent and yours, we're British. If I Google pictures of British beaches in 1979, they look like a different country. Almost everyone is what we would now call skinny or in fact quite ripped, right? You think, this is weird. What happened? So between the year I was born and I'm now 45, obesity in Britain rose from 6% of the population to 27% of the population. In the world more generally, in my lifetime, obesity has more than trebled, right? What happened? Why? It's because of the food you're asking about. So we know the answer to this, and obviously this is a process that's happened even more recently in many of the countries that people are watching from. So this transformation, this explosion in obesity, you've got basically 300,000 years human beings exist, and obesity happens sometimes, but it's unbelievably rare. And then essentially in your lifetime and mine, it blows up. And we know why. It happens in every country that makes one change. It's where people move from mostly eating fresh whole foods they prepared on the day to mostly eating processed and ultra-processed foods, which means foods that are built in factories out of chemicals in a process that isn't even called cooking, it's called manufacturing food. And it turns out that kind of food affects our bodies in a really different way to the old kind of food. There's an experiment that really helped me to understand this. It was done by a scientist I interviewed called Dr. Paul Kenny, who's the head of neuroscience at Mount Sinai in New York. I've nicknamed this experiment Cheesecake Park. It's not the official name. Very simple experiment. He got a load of rats and he raised them in a cage. And all they had was the kind of natural whole foods that rats evolved to eat over thousands of years. And when that's all they had, the rats would eat when they were hungry and they would stop when they were full. They seemed to have some natural way of knowing when they were full, and they just stopped eating. So the rats never became fat when they had the natural food they evolved for. Then Dr. Kenny introduced the rats to the American diet. He bought a load of cheesecake, he bought a load of Snickers bars, he fried up some bacon, and he put it in the cage. And the rats went crazy for the American diet. They ate and ate and ate and ate. The way he put it to me is within a couple of days, they were different animals. And quite rapidly, they were all severely obese. Then Dr. Kenny tweaked the experiment again in a way that feels a bit cruel to me as a former KFC addict. He took away the American diet and left them with nothing but the healthy food again. And he was sure he knew what would happen. He thought they would eat more of the healthy food than they had at the start. And that would prove that, eating this food expands the number of calories you eat in a day. That is not what happened. What happened was much weirder. Once they'd had the American diet and it was taken away, the rats refused to eat at all. It was like they no longer recognized the healthy food as food. It was only when they were literally starving to death that they went back to it. Now, I would argue we are all living in a version of that experiment right now, right? We're all living in an environment where the food we're eating, this very unnatural food that your grandparents never had one mouthful of, my grandparents never had one mouthful of, it didn't exist then, profoundly undermines our ability to feel full. And what these drugs do is they give you back your sense of fullness, but of course, at a cost, with a risk.
What's interesting is that there are a lot of factors, of course, and you touched on some of those. People don't eat at home now. They don't cook in the way they used to. Every street, certainly in parts of Britain where I go now, it seems like there's, fast food shops, kebab shops and everything all along the street. So people are grabbing that quick fix. They don't seem to have the time for it either. But I wonder, in this case with the drug, for many people, it's more a kind of a target, a project. I'll get down to my ideal weight and then I can start to adjust my lifestyle and so on and so forth. You've continued with the drug. Presumably you see it as something you're going to do for life. Is that correct?
So you've asked a really important question, and the answer is complicated. So what the drug companies say is these drugs work as long as you take them, and when you stop taking them, they stop working. We know, for example, blood pressure medication, right, or statins, they're not a cure, but they treat the problem, and then when you stop taking them, the problem comes back. The drug companies argue these drugs are like that, and they have produced some scientific research that seems to back that up. So they've done a very small amount of research into it, but the studies they've done indicate when people stop taking the drug, the vast majority of them regained the vast majority of the weight they'd lost within a year. Now, obviously, we want to be a little bit skeptical of that because the drug companies have a vested interest in getting us to continue buying them forever. Anecdotally, there are some people, I know some of them, who are saying, look, I took the drug, I used it to interrupt my eating habits and change. Now I've stopped and I'm remaining at a lower weight. There's no scientific evidence to back that up yet. I don't know, but I suspect the drug companies are right. We'll know a lot more in the next few years because, of course, we'll have lots of people who try both models, right? But for me, the decision, and there are lots of people, anyone who's thinking about taking these drugs, the truth is you have to weigh two kinds of risk. There's the risk of taking these drugs. There are significant risks. And there's the risk of continuing to be obese, right? Now, if you're not obese, don't take the drugs, right? Because you're getting all the risk without the health benefit. If you are obese, try the other methods first. There's much less risk from diet and exercise than there is from these drugs. So of course, try that. But I doubt there's a single fat person watching who's never tried a diet, right? Sadly, most diets fail. Not all, but most. So you've got to weigh these two risks. The risk of the drugs, the risk of being obese. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm slightly embarrassed to say this as well. The thing that most shocked me in the research for my book, Magic Pill, was learning the science of just how bad for you obesity is. everything we fear medically, pretty much, is made more likely by being obese. You're much more likely to get cancer. You're much more likely to get dementia. You're much more likely to get a stroke, which is the thing doctors most fear getting because it's awful. You're much more likely to have a heart attack. For me personally, given that there was such a history of heart disease in my family, and given that we know people who take these drugs, there's very good research now showing this, if you take these drugs and you started with a BMI higher than 27, as I did, in the 2 years that follow, you are 20% less likely to have a heart attack or stroke. That's huge. That's a huge decrease in risk. And there's more and more evidence emerging of health benefits as well as I say, risks. So for me, that was the thing that sealed it, right? Loads of the men in my family get heart attacks. My dad had a heart attack. My uncle died of a heart attack. My grandfather died of a heart attack. I'm now older than he ever was, as I mentioned. So for me, that was decisive. But other people will look at the risks that I go through in Magic Pill and come to a different conclusion for them. I think we have to think about this in a very personalized way. People need to go down the risks and benefits for themselves.
I think that's a very important point too as well, Johan. You actually, instead of just taking the injection like many people do and getting on with their lives saying, look, it's going to work for me, you really investigated it deeply. You wrote about it with Magic Pill, and you've weighed up all the sides. So I guess people that way at least have reference points, which a lot of the time they don't, because they get caught up with the fad of it.
I think that's very true. I would also just stress I'm not a doctor, so people should certainly talk to their doctors. And I obviously don't speak for the drug companies involved. I think you're right that the kind of fad element of this. So I would draw a distinction between a few sets of people. There are people who are overweight or obese who are taking these drugs to get down to be a healthy weight. Now, there's significant risks associated with that, as we've said, but I think there's a strong case for that. And the more obese you are, the stronger the case for it is, because the worse your obesity is, the worse the dangers to your health. Then there's, of course, people, a totally separate category, people who have type 2 diabetes, because these drugs also treat that problem, who obviously have a very strong case for taking it. Then you've got people who are neither diabetic nor overweight or obese, who are taking it to actually be super skinny, right? For example, I was on a TV show with one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey who said, we're all taking it. And of course, none of them were fat at the start. They were all already skinny. Now, look, women are made to feel terrible about their bodies, whatever they do. I'm not judging or criticizing those women. They're put in an intolerable position. But I would strongly urge, based on the scientists I've interviewed and the evidence I've learned, people who are already healthy weight or skinny to not take these drugs for lots of reasons, but I'll just give you one of many. So there are health risks to being too thin. For example, a very important marker of health, particularly as you age, is muscle mass. So muscle mass is the total amount of soft tissue in your body. It's really important for getting out of a chair, walking up the stairs. It's crucial for movement. And when you take these drugs, or when you lose weight in any way, you generally don't just lose fat mass, you lose muscle mass, right? That won't be a problem when you're 35, 40, even 50. But as you get older, we naturally shed muscle mass every year, starting when you're 25, which I find incredibly depressing. But so you naturally shed muscle mass every year. If you're going into the aging process with already very artificially low levels of muscle mass because you're too skinny, you're much more likely when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s to be really quite debilitated, to really struggle to get out of a chair, to climb the stairs, to be able to move properly. It's a condition called sarcopenia, which happens as people age, but you're really increasing the odds of that. And that's just one of the many health risks that you're taking on. So yeah, I really urge people to not do that.
And presumably, Johan, you have to make sure that limited amount of food that you do eat under the influence of these kind of drugs has to be nutritious enough to fill the gap with all the kind of essentials, minerals, vitamins, and so on.
It's a super important point. One of the 12 risks of these drugs that I talk about, and they range quite widely from, and I stress again, weighing against the massive, massive benefits of this incredible new breakthrough. But if we think about the risks, they range from, some scientists argue these drugs may be increasing the risk of thyroid cancer, though some others highly dispute that, eating disorders, And exactly as you say, one of the 12 risks is malnutrition, right? For example, a close relative of mine is taking these drugs and just was taking such a high dose, she just didn't eat. You know, she was really, her kids were having to remind her to eat every day. That's obvious, and a lot of people I think are taking very high doses of these drugs. So yeah, that's a really big way. I mean, this is slightly over the top, the way I'm going to put this. But the way I think of these drugs is they're a tool like fire. They're just such a powerful tool. And fire is a great tool if I use it to warm up my house. And it's a really terrible tool if I use it to burn down your house. And this breakthrough we've made is so powerful, a drug that really can transform your relationship with food and your body. That's going to have positive and negative effects. You know, the book is called Magic Pill because there's 3 ways these drugs could be magic. The first is the most obvious. They could just solve the problem of obesity, right? And I've got to be honest with you, there are days when it feels like that. My whole life, I've massively overeaten. And now once a week, I do a tiny little injection into my leg, barely feel it. I don't overeat anymore. I've lost 15% of my body weight, more I think now. Staggering. The second way it could be magic is more worrying. It could be like a magic trick. It could be like a magician who shows you a card trick while he picks your pocket, right? It could be that over time, the 12 significant risks associated with these drugs outweigh the benefits. I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but it's certainly possible. The third way it could be magic is I actually think the most likely. Think about the stories of magic that we all grew up with. Think about like, what would be a good example? Aladdin, right? You find the lamp, you rub it, the genie appears, the genie grants your wish, and your wish comes true, but never quite in the way you expected, right? There's always some unpredictable effects. And I think we're already seeing that with wave of eating disorders in the United States, but, you know, it'll have a massive economic effect apart from anything else. You know, Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme were having their stock tank, right? Because so many Americans are taking these drugs. There was a big report by Jefferies Financial for the airlines in the US saying they're going to have to spend a lot less money on jet fuel pretty soon because the population's about to get so much thinner, and obviously it takes more jet fuel to fly heavier people. So there's a whole series of huge and unpredictable cascading effects on the economy, on our health, on how we feel about ourselves that are going to happen as the result of these drugs. And I hope my book gives people an opportunity to kind of take a beat and think through what this staggering transformation is going to mean for all of us.
Now, important point, you called your book Magic Pill, and in that respect, there was a time perhaps when people would see someone fit, you know, out there, and they could tell they'd been working out, they'd been exercising hard. Now we have the magic pill, as you put it. Did anyone ever make you feel like you were cheating by using this to lose weight?
They didn't have to. I felt it myself. And I really thought a lot about this. I thought, God, I really feel like I'm cheating. And that's weird. Like, one of my best friends takes statins for his, to cholesterol. And I've never once looked at him and gone, you cheat, getting ahead of me when it comes to cholesterol. Never crossed my mind, right? This is really odd, right? And I looked a lot at the history of how we think about being fat, being obese. And if you go right back to, if you look at the history of this, you know, look, for example, in the 6th century, the Pope Gregory I, described gluttony as one of the 7 deadly sins, right? It's always depicted with some really fat person stuffing their face, right? And I've been that fat person. It's very deep in Western culture and many cultures, the idea that being fat is a sin. And you can see that because what are the kinds of weight loss that we admire, right? They're ones that follow the kind of classic Christian idea of like, you've sinned, you get punished, and then we forgive you, right? So like, if someone goes through some horrendous diet and we really see them suffer and they do really extreme forms of exercise, we're like, okay, we forgive you, right? But in a way, I think one of the reasons I felt like I was cheating is it was almost too easy, right? It didn't require any effort at all. I didn't have to suffer. It's like, oh, so I sinned by being fat, but then I kind of got out of jail free, right? But you only have to hear me say that to realize, I hope we can move on from the ideas of a 6th century Pope, right? Because the truth is, obesity has exploded all over the world. And it's not because we're sinners. It's because there's been a transformation in the food supply system that's made us really sick, right? And that's not your fault. That's not my fault. That's not the fault of anyone watching this. That's a big structural change that was done to us. More 3-year-old children know what the McDonald's M means than know their own last name in the United States, right? You didn't choose this, right? This has been done to us. And I think if we can get out of seeing it as a sin and a competition and a race, and more that we're all in this boat together and we've got a shared problem, and part of the solution, I believe, will come from these drugs. Part of the solution will come from changing our culture so we don't allow our kids to be screwed up in this way. And I went to Japan where they have almost no obesity at all, and I saw how they've done that. They've not allowed that to be done to their children and to themselves. But yes, I think we've got to have more grown up and mature ways of thinking about this. But, those ideas are in all of us. No one should be shamed for having those ideas. They're deep in our culture. But I do think these drugs give us an opportunity to move beyond them.
Johan, well done for actually documenting all this in your book, Magic Pill, because I think for a lot of people, this is going to be an important guide. It really has gone crazy in terms of even shortages of the drugs, as you well know. So I'm sure we'll have a chance to chat again. But thank you very much for taking the time out.
Oh, Yoss, great questions. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you. There are millions of people around the world who've had a positive experience with weight loss injections, and plenty of others who've experienced unpleasant or dangerous side effects. But there's another aspect to these quick cures which concerns public health experts, and that's the effect they're having on people's attitudes to fitness, well-being and body image. To discuss that, I'm joined now by Professor Devi Sridhar, who is Chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh, and she's also a personal trainer. Professor Devi Sridhar, thank you very much for joining the show. Now, we'll discuss the benefits of exercise and a healthy diet in just a moment, but I'd like to start by asking you, how bad is the global problem of obesity, and why is it increasing in so many parts of the world?
Yeah, so obesity is a huge health challenge, and in some countries, the #1 health challenge. And the reason is it's because it's linked to a number of chronic diseases like heart disease, cancers, stroke, major problems for most healthcare systems. And also it's increasing in all parts of the world. So it's not just in the United States or Britain, Europe, kind of places we traditionally think of having kind of high income problems. This is something that's also a problem now across Africa, Asia, Australasia, Middle East. And so it's truly like a global tide engulfing the world.
Now, perhaps to use the wrong phrase, but how much appetite is there among governments to perhaps limit people's intake of unhealthy processed foods?
This has been a really tricky topic because it has to do actually with the cost of food as well. Ultra processed foods, cheaper foods, think of fast foods, are generally cheaper. They're easily able to buy. They don't go off, and you have a huge private sector behind them supporting them. It is much easier to bring those to market and to distribute them compared to healthier options like fruits, vegetables, grains, meats, dairies, all that kind of more natural sources of food. And so I think here it is a real challenge for governments because they're dealing with this rising market that people want to have. And it's how do you do that in a way where people still feel like they have the options to eat what they want to eat, that it's affordable, but also trying to redirect their populations towards dealing with this weight challenge.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is it a matter of education or regulation?
Well, it's really tricky because if you just go down the route of awareness, which is of course important, you miss out the socioeconomic gradient, which is what you see with obesity. So take Scotland, where I'm based. If you look at the wealthiest neighborhoods, you don't find many children who are obese. If you go to the poorer areas, you will find rates of 50 to 60% of children who are obese. It's led the head of the Royal College of Pediatrics to say that child obesity is actually a marker of child poverty because children are not being able to eat healthier options. And so I think here, just focusing on education neglects actually the structural forces of why is it that we do see higher obesity rates in lower socioeconomic groups.
So then to what degree have quick fix drugs such as Ozempic, Wegovy and Mounjaro kind of limited or diverted the attention from actually getting to the root causes of obesity?
Well, it's worth saying that these drugs were developed actually for a really important medical use, which is for people who have type 2 diabetes or who are pre-diabetic, whose body struggles to produce insulin, and these drugs can help trigger that. So actually, they do have really important clinical uses to try to help people who are suffering from those conditions. I think the challenge is thinking it's a quick fix for your entire population beyond the immediate issue of cost. I mean, the drugs are expensive. In the States, it can be upwards of $1,000 a month. In Britain, it's been brought down to £100 a month, but then you can't easily get it because there are shortages. It is the issue of actually, is this the right solution for the majority of people? Or should we keep this drug for those where doctors say it is medically necessary and helpful? And that is a small segment of your population. It's not everybody.
And of course, it became kind of popularized with Hollywood stars, using it as a way to change their body image. And I wonder, has that fascination with body image always been with us, or is it increasingly becoming an obsession?
Well, I think there's always been this obsession with wanting to be a certain size or look a certain way or be a certain weight. And that kind of takes away from what we actually want to get to with health, which is how can your body be in the healthiest state so you avoid disease, illness, and pain? And that actually comes through eating a healthy diet, not because you're reaching a certain weight, but actually because that gives your body nutrients, energy sources, different types of minerals, vitamins that help your body stay healthy. And same with exercise. Exercise isn't a punishment to lose weight. It actually is a way to move blood around your body to keep your heart strong, your lungs and organs staying healthy, and to stay independent, especially as you get older. So I think that kind of larger message of actually health being about fitness and being independent and being strong has been lost in the idea of just, try to lose weight and reach a certain size.
Now, Professor, why are women and girls particularly vulnerable? And how dangerous is it to go through this kind of quick weight loss if one isn't really overweight in the first place?
Yes, it is quite dangerous because, for example, here in Britain, people are getting the drugs through online pharmacies or even from friends, taking it and ending up in hospital and A&E with very severe side effects. And this is because it is not meant to be a drug for a quick weight loss. It is not meant to be for people who are within a healthy weight and don't have a medical condition. There are specific groups it can be really helpful for, but I think people saying, oh, I want to lose, 15 pounds, 30 pounds, I'm just going to take this. They are neglecting the severe side effects that can come with it, which is why we are now seeing doctors coming out with warnings saying this is not just a mild drug or a quick fix. This is actually a medication that can be given under medical supervision for specific conditions where it can help.
And you mentioned there are shortages of it now because of this rapid demand. And I'm wondering what governments and the medical community are doing to try to make sure the drug only gets to those who really need it.
Well, it is really tricky, right? Because in the end now, especially with the internet, people can access drugs and go on and order them. But for example, here in Britain, because of those shortages, the NHS has said we have to have the drug for the people who actually really need it, people who have type 2 diabetes or other metabolic syndrome conditions who need this drug to be able to, live their life in a healthy way. And so they are trying to limit people being able just to purchase it legally. But of course, then people are going online and finding other ways of accessing it. So my message is, more to someone, if you're in a healthy weight range, you're thinking, oh, this is a quick way I can, get a beach body or whatever you might want to get. It's not the drug to go to. This is not the route to take. This is a medication that should be a doctor saying to you, this is a good thing to do. And it is really helpful. It has helped, quite a number of, it has helped quite a few individuals be able to lose weight or be able to manage their diabetes. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. This is a good drug, but it is medicine and it is not without side effects and consequences.
Well, I read in your article where you refer to that term beach body. You ask, what does that mean anyway?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to kind of social media. You raise that young girls and women are exposed to this. If you do go on Instagram or TikTok, you're just constantly exposed to fitness influencers or models showcasing, their six pack or their abs or how you're supposed to look in a certain outfit. And it can make you feel really low about how you look. You think, I don't look like that. How can I look like that? But that for me is what I call a commercialized FOMO. It's basically saying to you, oh, if you only bought this product or if you had this, you'd feel better about yourself like I do, the influencer who's trying to show you this. So I think it's kind of just recognizing that actually it's not real. This is not depicting health and well-being in its fullest form. And that actually a beach body is whatever body you have. And if you can get to a beach and walk on it or run with your dogs or chase your grandkids. That's a beach body and a healthy beach body and what you want to be doing with your body rather than looking a certain way that you see online.
You did touch on it a little bit earlier, but what are the biggest benefits? Let's go over them of exercise and diet that people are missing out on when they actually sign up for weight loss medicine like this.
Yeah, so for example, exercise has a number of benefits that have nothing to do with weight loss. So for example, cardio, that's when you go running or jogging or walking and your heart rate goes up and you start to sweat. That flow of blood around your body actually improves your heart function, your organs. It actually gets your muscles energized. So that's one big function of cardio exercise. Then you think of resistance training, that's doing push-ups or deadlifts or even, carrying something in the grocery store home. That works your muscles, which means that your muscles that you need to continue to stay independent and keeps you out of a care home in later life or keeps you being able to live without needing someone helping you. So, and there's flexibility, which is people think of yoga or Pilates, but just stretching out. That's a great way to avoid chronic pain and tight parts of your body, which all of a sudden start to result in that chronic pain and that dull sensation you might get when you sit and you think, oh, my back's really hurting. That is linked to flexibility. So I guess the point being that these kind of components of exercise are useful in and of themselves. Losing weight's a byproduct. And usually it happens because you're moving your body and then we expend calories. But just losing the weight without doing the exercise means you're not getting those benefits that come with physical activity and movement.
From your studies, from what you know, are people actually turning their backs on exercise and a better diet because of the availability of these kind of drugs?
I think that what we are seeing has been a quick fix, people wanting to quickly lose weight, seeing these studies. And there are studies showing that Ozempic does work. It does lead to weight loss in studies more than if you just exercise and eat well, and being attracted to that and thinking that's an easier path for me. So I think coming back to education and awareness, it's just getting that message out that it's more complicated than that, that actually there are side effects, and that if you're in already kind of a healthy weight range and you don't have, any signs of early diabetes, it's not the right path for you, and that other paths will be better, even if they're not as quick or as simple at face value.
Now, there have been documentaries on it, articles on it, that it seems Japan pretty much leads the world when it comes to healthy diet and healthy lifestyle. How do they achieve it? What can we learn from the Japanese?
There's a lot to be learned from the Japanese, starting from their approach to how they eat. They eat a range of whole foods, vegetables, fish. They have not been faced with the same kind of fast food, ultra-processed food wave that other countries have faced. There's also, if you look at the islands of Okinawa, which have the largest, number of people who live past 100, one key thing is they don't eat past being 80% full. So it means not eating to the point where you feel, oh, wow, I'm really full and I can't eat another bite. They actually stop before that. I think it's just a range of a healthier lifestyle in terms of eating in a diverse range of whole food sources, fruits and vegetables, fish, but also not overeating, eating to a certain level and then stopping and saying, I've had enough for right now. Tied to that, our energy needs go down as we age. And so as we get older, we do need to eat less, and being attentive to that and thinking, I can't eat the same way I ate when I was 30, when I'm 40, or when I'm 60, or when I'm 80. It's a painful message, but it is true biologically that we just need fewer calories to maintain our body as we get older. And so that is also something I think the Japanese have been attentive to, that they do reduce their energy intake as aging, alongside aging.
And I guess there's a cultural element, because for people like me growing up, in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s, we still ate very much at home. There wasn't a lot of going out and eating and that kind of fast food, but we were still kind of under that culture of clean your plate. Whatever's been on your plate, you have to finish it. And that's a challenge.
Yes, completely. And I think that is something where when you go from places where there's been the idea of food scarcity, appreciation for food, not wasting, and then all of a sudden you move in towards a climate where we have an abundance of calories, an abundance of food, an abundance of, cheap calories in the form of crisps or chocolates or sweets or sodas, things where you can consume it and in great quantities. We have a real challenge. And that is what we're seeing in a lot of low and middle income countries who are making that transition, where actually all of a sudden people do have options to eat a lot. They have that idea of food scarcity and of appreciation of food, but then it tips into you're in an environment where actually you have too much food. And that's why you're seeing huge rise in obesity rates. And as I mentioned, Ghana, India, places that you wouldn't expect to be facing this. You think more of infectious diseases. Well, actually, the challenge is moving into chronic disease.
Professor, do you tend to think of the people who use drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro as people who are cheating?
Not at all. I don't think so. I think these are medically necessary and they have a very important role to play. I think it is great they've been developed and actually many people are benefiting from them. But I think they have to be given under medical supervision towards those patients who actually need them. I think using as a quick fix for the whole population, one is quite dangerous, as I mentioned, the side effects and what you might be seeing in terms of people coming in, with harmful, health consequences. But also then we start to neglect the benefits of actually keeping that message and keeping that policies in place that encourage physical activity and a healthy diet. So I think it's not the message of don't take it. It's think about it before you take it and who's actually giving it to you. If it's a friend, don't take it. If it's a doctor and they're saying to you need it, that's a good reason to take it.
And presumably it's a good idea to have checks on your health all along the way, even when you're taking it, because of the potential risks.
Completely. And that's why it's under medical supervision to actually be attentive to the side effects. Some people actually can get quite ill from it immediately if it doesn't take to their bodies. Other people can have nausea, headaches, gallbladder problems. And so actually you do want that supervision in place when you're taking the medication. The other thing to mention is that studies have shown that it's a weekly injection, that if you stop taking it, within a year, people in a study regain 2/3 of their weight. So it is something that is not like you can take for a couple months, lose the weight, and then, okay, I'm done. You actually are signing up, if you want to keep that weight off, to having this for the foreseeable future. It is something that needs to be continuously done.
I wonder, Professor, where are we heading with all of this? Because the number of people using these drugs now, or at least trying to get their hands on them, is quite staggering. So are you essentially fighting a losing battle, or do you see a time when this is essentially seen as a fad, using the injections, and that people will kind of gravitate back towards healthy lifestyle, eating and exercise and so on?
So I think what we're seeing right now in terms of the Hollywood celebrities using it, young women taking it who just want to lose a bit more weight, who are already within a healthy weight range, is a fad. And I think when the side effects become more documented, when the long-term effects become more documented, and that cost-benefit balance can be properly assessed, people will say, I don't know if it's worth it. But I also want to say that I think it's great we have these drugs for those who are pre-diabetic, those who have diabetes, those who are severely obese, those who medically have been advised to take it, and they do have an important role to play. And I think they will continue to have that role to play. But it's against that balance over saying this is for everybody versus this is for a small segment of the population who actually do need it. And let's make sure we keep it for them. And for everyone else, let's go back to the basics of move your body, eat well. That will take you a long part of the way.
Professor Devi Sudhar, thank you so very much for joining the show.
Thank you.
I've recently begun my own journey using the weight loss drug Ozempic, so it's been fascinating for me to hear what our guests have told us about their experience and perspectives. While preparing for this episode, I've been discussing the issue with my producer Neil, and he had a lot of questions for me as well as the guests. So we've decided to do something a little different. We're going to turn the tables and have him throw questions to me about my relationship with food and the reasons behind my decision to pursue this solution. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Riz. I was thinking back to when we first worked together, it was about 30 years ago. And in those days, you were quite active. You were involved in martial arts and other pursuits. So my first question is, what happened?
Yeah, that's the question I've been asking myself for the past 30 years or so. I think actually what happened is my lifestyle got busier and busier, and with less of a routine. I was on airplanes a lot more. I was doing over 100 flights a year for, I don't know what, a decade. And a lot of sedentary lifestyle. I realized one thing is my body needs to move. And I gain weight easily if I don't. And so sitting in airplanes and waiting for airplanes to take off and getting to and from airports, it just absolutely killed the lifestyle in terms of routine for exercise and also for just eating habits and time zones. And they say, lack of sleep and so on, cortisol's pumping through the body, and that's what you see in front of you.
Yeah. So what's been the impact of weight gain on your body?
I think the biggest impact, now I'm starting to feel it as I enter into technically my 7th decade, it's the weight on the knees has obviously taken its toll. A little bit of, at this age, most of us get kind of osteoarthritis starting to show, and of course the extra weight doesn't help in terms of joints, and the menisci get damaged. Plus, being very active also takes its toll over the years. So skiing very hard and doing the martial arts, added with the weight now, has taken its toll.
So have you tried to address weight gain in the past?
You know, again, it's very difficult with that kind of peripatetic lifestyle, traveling all the time and not having a routine. I have tried to sort of cut down on certain foods, but, you know, I always joke, my background, genetically, you might call it geographically, is half Punjabi, half Gujarati. And I joke that I had the worst of all worlds because I got the Punjabi appetite and the Gujarati sweet tooth. So that's always been a downfall for me, I think, you know. And I think also it was this sense of invulnerability. You know, when I was young, if I gained even a little bit, which was rare because of the activity, I could lose it so easily. And it really was not a problem. And I think this feeling of invulnerability and that constant sense of I'll just do some exercise and I'll lose this the reality kicks in, if you like. And I realize it's a lot harder now.
So what led you down the path towards Ozempic as a potential solution for all this?
Actually, it was, you know, I'm not one to self-medicate. I've got medical sciences in my background, so I'm not one to just say, let's take a jab and fix it. I don't think there is an easy fix, though people are talking about it this way, because ultimately I don't want to be on, you know, a drug like that for the rest of my life. I'm one of those perhaps a bit naive, but I say, let me get to my target weight and then I can try to manage it from there. But that does involve lifestyle changes. And I just, actually, it was a couple of friends who are doctors that recommended it to me. They said, this is a good way to get to that target weight. Now, they didn't really want to discuss whether I'll be stuck on it forever. But let's see. I mean, you know, I'm only just a few weeks into it, and I'm using a very low dose, building up slowly. So it wasn't a kind of let's jab it in there and you know, let's see the weight go. It's not going to be that easy.
Yeah. Well, there's quite an unpleasant list of side effects, aren't there? And I was just wondering, did any of those put you off?
I've been lucky. Generally, my health, touch wood, has been very good, and I respond well to medicine and stuff like that if I ever have to have it, which I rarely ever have. And I think that I've taken the approach that my body's fairly good at handling stuff, so I'm hoping that's not the case for me, that, you know, there will be any issues. But I also do take the advice of monitoring my biometrics once I've been on it for a few weeks to actually find out if there's any potential risk. I will keep an eye on it for sure.
Well, I know how much you've always enjoyed food, both cooking it for others and particularly eating it yourself. And I was just thinking, how is Riz going to manage not eating this stuff, not savouring the food? Do you not think you're going to miss it?
No, I'll have to learn to have smaller portions. I mean, but I'm going to reveal also that, you know, 34 years ago when we first met, you were the one who had hollow legs. You could just pile it all away. And I did, where did all the food go? And it's like, and he hasn't gained even an ounce, you know. I think I will be able to adjust. I already found I'm starting to do that a little bit anyway, not because of the drug, but just generally. I found by fasting regularly, I started doing something called water fasting during COVID, because as one of our guests said, you know, everyone in COVID was just kind of piling on weight from lack of activity. I was locked down for about 5 weeks. I couldn't go anywhere outside my apartment. So I actually started doing water fasting, where 40 hours a week I would have 0 calories. And they call it like a monk fast if it's over 36 hours. And combined with walking, once we could get out, I found the weight just fell off me.
So you were talking about the weight dropping off, but on the other hand, if you quit these kind of weight loss drugs, it's understood that you could gain as much as 2/3 of that weight back on within the first year. So are you in it for the long term? Well,
again, lifestyle adjustment. I mean, I'll be happy to lose just the 1/3 if it stays at that. But I have a theory that I gain weight just from inhaling dust. So I'm not sure how I will cope. But I'm going to try it, and I'm going to try to adjust my lifestyle. I mean, one thing I'm hoping for, and that was, again, a recommendation from the doctors, was, you know, by losing weight, and I'm kind of I'm generally heavy, muscly and heavy, I'd like to think, is that I actually put a lot of weight on my knees, and that's causing the, you know, kind of injuries, if you like, that I've experienced recently. By losing that weight, maybe I can get back into more of an exercise routine which won't take its toll on my knees, and that hopefully will be a positive cycle rather than what has been a negative cycle for me, which is weight gain, not being able to exercise because of the weight on my knees, and so on and so forth. So yeah, maybe it's too much information, but my goal is to try to get fitter.
Now, one of the side effects that people have noticed is a thing called Ozempic face, which effectively, it's not necessarily due to the weight loss drugs. It's part of just losing weight anyway. You lose muscle mass as well. And when that takes effect on the face, you can have this kind of gaunt appearance. So I'm just wondering whether you're going to be able to look forward to a haggard, flappy-faced version of Riz in the weeks ahead.
Well, as you would probably tell people, I'm good at talking a lot, which means my jaw muscles get a lot of exercise, so it's unlikely they'll suffer too much. I've got quite a chubby face anyway, so let's see what happens. I mean, you know, if I do look like I'm going into, you know, skeletal mode, maybe I'll have to start thinking twice.
Well, the great thing, of course, about you being on screen is that the viewers themselves will be able to watch this in process. So let's check in another 3 months or 6 months and see how you're getting on. And good luck with it, Riz.
Yeah, thank you. And my clothes, I'll have a new range, a new wardrobe range, I hope, which is basically my old clothes that I used to fit in. Cheers, Neil.
Cheers, Riz.
I leave you with a final thought. The Danish company Novo Nordisk, which created Ozempic and Wegovy, is now the most valuable business in Europe, with a market capitalization of over $600 billion. That's 50% more than the entire Danish economy. Well, we began this episode with a surprising statistic that 1 billion people on the planet are obese. So let's end with another equally shocking figure. 800 million people on Earth, or 1 in 10, go to bed hungry. While it seems the problem of global obesity is being transformed by drugs which stop people from feeling hungry, the same cannot be said for the problem of true global hunger. The magic pill which achieves that feat seems like a distant dream. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's programme, Hezbollah vows to retaliate and blames arch-foe Israel for Tuesday's pager explosions in Lebanon and Syria, which killed at least 12 people and wounded up to 2,800 others. Hospitals in Lebanon are overwhelmed by the influx of casualties. In some places, the injured have had to be treated in car parks. And a Taiwanese brand and a Hungarian factory. More details are emerging about the supply chain where these pagers were manufactured and by who. Welcome to today's programme. Lebanon is slamming Israel for carrying out, quotes, a cyber attack, which resulted in hundreds of pagers exploding at the same time. Well, the country's foreign ministry says it has complained to the UN Security Council. This as the Middle Eastern country tries to ease tensions with Israel amidst the war in Gaza. Well, at least 9 people are known to have been killed in the explosions, which injured a further 2,800 others. Well, the pages are thought to have been used by the Iran-backed Hezbollah group. Well, Israel has not so far claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, the militant group Hezbollah says it will retaliate. Well, for the latest, we can cross to Beirut and we can speak to Salah Hijazi, who is the deputy editor at the newspaper L'Orient Le Jour. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. In an article in today's edition of L'Orient Le Jour, the Lebanese French language daily, which exists in English as well, I should add, you asked the question, is all of this a prelude to a larger military operation by Israel? What's the answer?
It has been said that through this cyber attack, Israel was able to impact Hezbollah's ability to communicate. Because ever since the beginning of this war, Hezbollah has been relying on more and more traditional means of communication in order to avoid Israel's ability to infiltrate its communication networks. Now, with the destruction of thousands of pagers, it is said that Hezbollah's ability to communicate and coordinate has been severely impacted, which might be the prelude of a bigger military operation by Israel, especially that even the health sector has been overwhelmed by yesterday's attack. Now, another version of the story says that Israel was preparing a similar plan, but ended up having to pull it off and to launch the cyber attack in a hurry because it appears Hezbollah was able to identify some pagers that where explosives had been planted. It's still unclear which of these two versions is the most likely one, as events are still unfolding here in Beirut.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't had much time to digest all of this information. But what's clear is that, yeah, I mean, Hezbollah looks really vulnerable. We've got a situation where thousands of their operatives are in hospital. We know who thousands of their operatives now are because their identities have been revealed by virtue of their injuries in many cases, and they have no means of communicating. Hezbollah does look vulnerable. What about the man at the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah? What are we hearing from him, if anything?
At the beginning, especially since the Iranian ambassador was also injured by the attacks, some were claiming that even Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, had one of these devices. This information was quickly denied by Hezbollah circles. Hassan Nasrallah will be speaking tomorrow at 5 p.m., but he is indeed really not in an enviable position.
Okay, but I'm assuming there was a lot of speculation. Yeah, sorry, the line just broke up there, but I'm guessing there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not Hassan Nasrallah really is okay, because if the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon had a pager, one would assume Nasrallah had one too.
I guess we still don't know if all of Hezbollah's leadership had this kind of pager. Hassan Nasrallah is really living in a situation where everything that comes close to him is well monitored. There's a lot of security measures taken around him. So I don't know if it's easy for Israel to smuggle this kind of device next to Hassan Nasrallah. I think it's probably easier to smuggle this kind of device to the Iranian ambassador.
Now, Hezbollah is a thorn in the side of many people in Lebanon, politicians, the general public. I mean, I'm assuming there's some pretty mixed emotions about what happened on Tuesday. What are people saying?
Indeed. It was interesting to see that even Hezbollah's local foes, such as Sami Raja, the head of the Lebanese forces, for now they are prioritizing national unity and compassion with the victims. But that does not mean that the political divide between the various actors in Lebanon is over. It's probably just a one-time short-term unity. What resembles some kind of national unity. Even among the Sunnis, we saw a lot of people in sunny areas like Tablos, Tripoli, or Tariq donating blood in order to help the thousands of injured people survive. But again, I don't think this will go beyond the current wave of compassion, and I don't think it will translate into any kind of political alignment between the various groups in Lebanon.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure like you and me, these horrific images that we've seen of people injured in hospital, not all of them Hezbollah militants, of course, innocent children, innocent civilians amongst them. I mean, that's clearly had an effect on people in Lebanon. And as you say, people coming forward to donate blood. I mean, there is a possibility, isn't there, that this could have the reverse outcome that Israel might have hoped for, in the sense, unifying the country, but you're saying that's only going to be for a short time.
Yeah, I don't think that this kind of operation will be able to fix the political strife in Lebanon. You know, there are a lot of grievances among the various factions that compose our political landscape, and although clearly there is a lot of compassion among the various people of this country, I really don't think that it will translate into long-term unity or long-term reconciliation.
What's the latest you can tell us about the situation in the hospitals in Lebanon? Because, 24 hours ago, hospitals were so overwhelmed that people were being operated on in car parks, even schools that were being used as makeshift hospitals. What's the situation today?
So far, what we know is that although the situation is far from perfect, as you said, it seems that most hospitals are still handling, because the injured are spread all around the territory, not in just one area. So far, it seems that the health system is being able to handle, but is indeed under a lot of pressure.
Okay, and what would you characterize the mood as being in Beirut today? Are people walking around going about their daily lives, or do you get the impression people are stunned and shocked walking down the streets?
The mood is rather gloomy here in Beirut. Schools have closed down, some businesses have closed down, universities as well. The streets are emptier than usual, and it does feel like there is a good some degree of people are feeling vulnerable, and especially that for the first time, the streets of Beirut itself were hit by the Israeli attack, which is the first since October 7th. So it does feel like people are scared, people are fearful, and everyone is waiting to see what Hezbollah will do next, because this will probably determine the outcome of this war.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it here. We're out of time.
The support front.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Salah Hijazi in Beirut. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get more on this now. I'm joined from London by the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Does this sound to you like it was a plan many years in the making?
Well, anything which requires ingenuity also requires time. And this was certainly an ingenious execution of a plan. So I suspect it has been a long time in the planning. And in a sense, we've seen evidence of this type of thing recently with the Department of Justice indictments in the US of Russian companies, where there's a use of front companies and shell companies in enabling these things to happen. And this is where I think you potentially in the future will see this Hungarian connection in the same way that the shell companies for the American indictment had companies from Turkey, the UAE, and Mauritius.
Yeah, as your answer implies, I mean, more details are sort of trickling out as the hours go by. We've got this Taiwanese brand, we've got this Hungarian manufacturer. How long does it sound to you like these pages had actually been in the possession of Hezbollah for?
Well, I think we know that earlier this year they took the decision that smartphones were not a sensible way forward. And that would be a sensible thing to do, because a smartphone is smart because you can exfiltrate data. It gives you your location. It's a computer that happens to make phone calls. So therefore, in terms of Israeli targeting, then carrying a smartphone is almost putting yourself up to be executed in the future. So that would have compromised you. So what they were trying to do is make sure that their operational security was better. The failure is in their counterintelligence and protective security in enabling these devices to come in without being checked. And that is a big no-no by itself, because, of course, a pager by itself cannot explode in the same way that a shoe couldn't explode. And yet we had the shoe bomber with Richard Reed and Al-Qaeda plot, in the same way that we had the underwear bomber, which nearly killed Mohammed bin Naif with the an al-Qaeda plot with Abdullah al-Asari, in the same way that we had the cassette bomber from the master bomber of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Ali al-Asari. So all these things are benign unless someone tampers with them. This was certainly a device which had been tampered with.
Yeah, I mean, tampered with to the extent that it injured thousands of people. Just tell us a bit more about the tech that was involved, because, I mean, just to be clear, I mean, this was not just a lithium battery overheating and exploding, was it? There's clearly an explosive that's been added into that device somewhere or other. Was it in the battery, do you think?
No. So a battery could combust, but that is different than an explosion. An explosion really produces two things, generally a blast and a shockwave. Now, in terms of the amount of the grams of explosive here, probably between 5 and 10 grams. So 5 grams of TNT in close proximity would produce a very limited blast radius, and that would be the thing which in close proximity to a body would produce those injuries such as the hand injuries, chest cavities. So in a way, it depends where you were carrying the pager, and also if there was a delay from the pager pinging and whether you picked it up and looked at it close to your face so that the injuries would be to the head. So I think there'll be a spectrum of injuries, which I think we've already seen, to hands, to faces, and to eyes particularly. But if you didn't had it in your pocket, then there are obviously potentially groin injuries as well. So a big spread of injuries. In terms of targeting, this is very precise targeting from the Israelis, assuming it is the Israelis. Essentially, what they've produced is a self-detonating small hand grenade where it's supposed to be explosive and the shrapnel from it, which is producing the injuries and deaths.
I'm reading some of the reports that suggest that an alphanumeric message triggered this. What does that mean in sort of everyday speak?
Well, rather like the IRA in Northern Ireland, when in their bomb making, when they had radio-controlled improvised explosive devices. To initiate an explosive, you need to complete a circuit. So that alphanumeric device would complete the circuit, which would alert the explosive to go off. You need some sort of detonating function within something to make it a bomb.
Okay, and one of the other questions that struck me whilst doing my research on this is the fact that people are still using pagers in the year 2024 is surprising enough. Even more surprising, that Taiwanese company produced about 240,000 pagers in the first 6 months of this year. I mean, who are the clients of pagers in this day and age? Is it simply people, groups like Hezbollah, people with something to hide?
Yeah, probably. I mean, we got rid of them 20 years ago when I was working in the Ministry of Defence. That technology was old hat. But again, this is the difference between essentially what was the analog age and the modern digital age. And the problem with the digital age, as we've seen here, is that everything can be infiltrated, exfiltrated. In terms of software and hardware, you can have what we call zero-day capabilities, rather like one of those was used, for example, in the Stuxnet attack on the centrifuges in Iran in 2010. And that is the vulnerability of everything in the digital age these days.
And this is being described as well as a supply chain hack. I'm seeing that term being bandied around quite a bit at the moment. I mean, do you think this is something we're going to be seeing more of in the months and years ahead?
Not really. I think people should be wary of that now. Each country, sovereign country, I think will be looking at that aspect of it. So, for example, from a UK perspective, there were big debates in the last 2 or 3 years about China in the infrastructure of the G4 network, particularly Huawei. So I think each security agency will be looking to see what components of foreign nations are in their systems, and they'll be quickly looking to get rid of them, because you can produce these either zombie computers or take over the infrastructure if you're not careful and don't have the safeguards. That said, this is highly unusual in that there's never been this isn't cyber per se, but there's never been a cyber Pearl Harbor, neither has there been a cyber Hiroshima.
Yeah, and I think now that people are aware that this is the sort of thing that can happen, I mean, certainly Hezbollah are going to be much more cautious in the future, but so might other organizations. So do you think it's fair to say, this is a trick that worked once, but it can't really work a second time?
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's the same with zero-day capabilities. Once you've used them, that's it. Their time expired. So what this really was is asymmetric warfare of the highest order, with a particular remit, really, which was the sort of widespread decapitation strategy of the command cadre of Hezbollah. Because if you're carrying a pager, you must be somewhere in the chain of Hezbollah command. And so that makes sense in terms of a asymmetric warfare. And as I said, a sort of ruthless decapitation strategy.
Yeah, so they were using these pagers because they were concerned about their communications being compromised. I mean, how are they going to communicate now?
Well, there's no such thing as a absolute secure communications unless you're using couriers. Even that was interdicted, of course, because that's how bin Laden was ultimately found. Or you can use a one-time pad, which came in the First World War. There's no such thing, as Turing said, is absolute security. There are strong doors and degrees of security, but there is no such thing as an absolute security in terms of a back door, side door, or a front door.
Okay, so there's no such thing as a totally risk-free platform for communication, despite some of the promises that are made by some of the applications that are out there that your messages are completely secure. So you're saying that doesn't exist?
Not really. There are very strong encryptions and security protocols, but if you've got the technology of certain agencies, there are always vulnerabilities which can be seized on. It's doing the sort of background work on seeing what those vulnerabilities are, and that's why this was a vulnerability which presumably Mossad have exploited.
There are a couple of reports I've read that suggested that some Hezbollah operatives got rid of their pages or put them away somewhere because they were finding they were constantly overheating. That implies, doesn't it, that this operation by Israel, if indeed it was Israel's operation, nearly didn't work.
Well, no, that may imply that you had the problem with the batteries, because as we started, Tom, on this interview, one of the things about batteries is that they can overheat and you can have this combustion. So it may have been either that there was some compromise which Mossad had learnt about, or that a significant number of the people they were after, they'd heard reports that they were discarding these things, and therefore it was the time to act.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, does this suggest to you, I mean, there is no comparable attack on this scale? You've never seen anything like this. This is completely unprecedented.
Yeah, I can't think of one on this scale before. As I've indicated, there's been sort of clever, cunning attacks in terms of shoe bombers, underwear bombers, cassette bombers, the liquid plot, which we still live with in terms of people having to discard their liquids at most of the airports for security. But the scale of this is beyond anything that I've ever seen, apart from probably 9/11. In terms of, at the moment, I think there are 2,750 people in hospital. In terms of precision targeting, in the past, I can't think of a comparable operation at all.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. The former head of counterterrorism at the Ministry of Defence in the UK, Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you. Well, for more on what the US is saying about these developments, we're going to head to Washington and we can speak to PJ Crowley. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. You're the former US Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs under President Obama and Special Assistant for National Security Affairs under President Bill Clinton. Thank you again for joining us. Washington says it wasn't involved. Washington says it has no idea who's responsible for those pager attacks. Does that all sound likely to you?
Well, I think it is certain that the United States was not involved. It was not given a heads up about what happened in Lebanon. As to what it has gleaned since then, hard to say.
I mean, it does sound, and we've got the impression in recent months and weeks that Washington has been losing patience or has been getting frustrated, to say the least, with Israel. Does it sound credible to you that perhaps there was a message in this attack to the United States, namely get Hezbollah to stand down somehow or other, otherwise that regional conflict that everyone's been fearing really will be a reality?
Well, look, I think the United States is well aware of the incredible intelligence capability that Israel possesses. We have seen in recent weeks, months, and years that Israel has the ability to strike out at its adversaries. That doesn't mean that this comes, at a quote unquote convenient time for the United States. Here we have the Secretary of State, in the region, trying to negotiate a ceasefire with regard to Gaza. At the same time, you have Israel escalating its ongoing conflict, with Hezbollah. The difficulty for Secretary of State Blinken and for the United States is that we do not have a strong relationship at the leadership level in Israel at the moment. It's a strong strategic relationship, but there are clear strains and disagreements as to the conduct of this conflict. And, the common denominator when you look at Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq is Iran. And the United States does not have the ability to talk directly with Iran. So, Tony Blinken is doing his best in the region, but it's difficult to see how much he's going to be able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, the United States has been calling on Iran and its allies. You mentioned the Houthis in Yemen, saying don't take advantage of the situation to raise the stakes or bring about more instability. What sort of scenarios do you think they're envisaging by way of possible retaliation for those attacks in Lebanon?
Well, the Hezbollah has promised a response, but right now it is quite likely, in chaos. It has lost the ability to communicate, directly with its various elements across Lebanon. So I think it's going to take some time for Hezbollah to figure out what to do and what it means.
So the US, as you've been saying, concerned that Iran, its allies like the Houthis in Yemen, could take advantage of the situation. What sorts of scenarios do you think Washington's envisaging by way of possible retaliatory action by those allies in the region?
Well, Hezbollah has promised an attack of some time, a response of some kind. Right now, it is undoubtedly in chaos because it's lost the ability to communicate reliably with its various elements. So I think it'll be some time before we see, Hezbollah's response and what that means. Israel has in the past demonstrated the ability to neutralize, the launching of rockets from Lebanon, into Israel proper. So much depends on Iran's calculations here, as we've seen in the past with various provocations. Iran is very cautious about how it responds or how its various militias respond, and I think that will be the case here. No doubt, the United States has communicated indirectly, with Iran regarding this latest situation. It is a multi-sided chessboard. It is highly complex and very hard to predict at this point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the analysts we spoke to yesterday here on Al Arabiya was saying this is a humiliation for Hezbollah, and by extension, it's a humiliation for Iran. And there's been a chain of these humiliations when we look at targeted assassinations and various other operations carried out by Israel. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine Iran and its allies doing nothing, isn't it? They have to, don't they, for the sake of their own image?
And just to add to that, Tom, it is difficult to know how much influence Iran actually has. You had a situation, in the last few days where the Houthis out of the blue, launched a rocket into Israel proper. So it is entirely possible that, while Iran wants to be cautious, does not want to see, wants to see a response, but does not want to see a further escalation, how much control it has over various elements will be part of this, very difficult and complex equation.
One of the revelations pretty early on yesterday was the fact that the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was injured by an exploding pager. the fact that he had one of these pages used by Hezbollah operatives, what does that tell you about the nature of that relationship between? I mean, do you think that's revealing in any way?
Well, it's reinforcing. We have long understood the very close relationship, that Hezbollah has with Iran. Iran has backed them for some time. It has been a vanguard of Iran's efforts to gain influence, if not control, in its arc of resistance against Israel. So this is not a surprise at all. We have always known that when you look at the array of militias that Iran contributes to, the strongest relationship that it has is with Hezbollah.
Interesting to know in terms of the timing. On the eve of that attack in Lebanon with the pages, the US envoy Amos Hochstein was in Israel. So what we're saying here is that on the eve of a massive cyber attack, the United States and Amos Hochstein were kept entirely in the dark by the hosts, Israel, here.
Sure, and that just underscores how difficult the relationship is at the leadership level, between the United States today and Israel today. Benjamin Netanyahu is fighting for his political life. He has resisted efforts to reach a ceasefire in Lebanon. He has resisted efforts to even engage in calculations about what happens the day after the conflict ends in Gaza. He seems to be prepared, to widen the conflict, in not only to try to force Hezbollah back from the Lebanese border, but he's widening the conflict because he understands that when this war ends, and inevitably it will, he faces an uncertain political reckoning of his own. But while we have a strong strategic institutional relationship between the United States and Israel, right now at the political level, there's great tension, there's great disagreement. Netanyahu and Biden are openly, on different pages when it comes to the conflict here. And as Amos Hochstein, just found out, we're not on the same page with the Minister of Defense, Gallant, as well. So this makes it very, very difficult. The United States does have influence with Israel, but at the present time, one has to acknowledge that influence is very limited.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're echoing what a couple of people we've spoken to here on Al Arabiya have told us in the last few days, namely that Benjamin Netanyahu is really biding his time, at least until November. What sort of an outcome do you think he's hoping for in the US election?
And I think that's it's a very very important backdrop to underscore. We are 6 weeks from the presidential election. It is unlikely that the Biden administration is going to change course, before early November. So we're trying to do our best to keep a lid on to prevent an escalation. But you're going to need, in all likelihood, some clarity as to political leadership in the United States, in Israel, in the region, if you have any prospect of making major progress on this going forward. And even that's going to be very difficult. But sure, whether you're Iran, Russia, China, Israel, you're all looking to see what happens in November, and that's going to, guide various actions between now and then.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. PJ Crowley, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
The Israeli military, which has been engaged in cross-border fighting with Hezbollah since the start of the Gaza war in October, has declined to respond to questions about these explosions. But what do ordinary Israeli citizens think about all this? Well, let's take a listen to what some people said on the streets of Jerusalem.
It was a great thing, I think, very clever, very focused, and I thank God that it happened. It's the time to punish the wrong people, the bad people, the ignorant people.
What I think is that Israel proved again that our imagination is endless. We can hit and get our enemies anytime. I just hope that the Israeli government will just continue, surprise our enemies, and end the situation, because it won't end without a war.
Israel should fight and fight hard until we have quiet here. So my kids will have a good life, not like ours.
Reaction there from Jerusalem. Well, let's cross the Tel Aviv. We can speak to our correspondent there, Sarah Coate. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, these orders for those attacks in Lebanon and Syria presumably came from the very top. What's the Israeli government saying about all this?
Hello there, Tom. Still no comment from any Israeli official, and it's pretty unlikely that there will be one, given that Israel's policy is not to comment on these kinds of matters. But we do need to remember what we heard just hours before this attack, and that is Israel expanding its war goals to include returning these displaced residents, some 60,000 northern Israelis, to their homes. But certainly a lot of concern on the ground, and this is why very high-level meetings have been taking place just a few kilometres from where I'm standing here in Tel Aviv at the IDF headquarters, the Kiryat. We do know that top security officials have been meeting there, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So certainly, once again, a lot of concern after this attack, but really on the ground, what is also being seen is further deployment of troops. This is the 98th Division of paratroopers. They've recently been serving in Gaza. They've had a few-week break and are now being redeployed to this northern border with Lebanon. Now, Tom, according to a number of reports citing senior US officials, Israel's Mossad did actually plant these explosives in these pages months ago. Now, this was reportedly initially planned as a sort of pretext to a wider scale confrontation, but there was a lot of concern within the Israeli security establishment, according to these reports, that this plot was about to be foiled, so they detonated these explosive-laden pages early.
OK, and we're hearing Hezbollah saying they're going to retaliate. Is that generating much concern there in Israel?
Certainly in these northern regions, it is generating a lot of concern. A number of municipalities up in the north, they've been instructing residents to remain very close to shelter, although at this hour, there is still no change in the military's home front command, the directive given to the public. Here on the ground in Tel Aviv, where I am, it's pretty much business as usual. People are certainly talking about the prospect of a wider scale war, and flights have been cancelled. We're talking here Air France, British Airways, Lufthansa. Flights until further notice in and out of Tel Aviv have been suspended. But really, in terms of here on the ground in Tel Aviv, life is very much as usual. We're not seeing any panic buying like these previous confrontations between Israel and Hezbollah, and people are really going about their day as normal. So on the ground, not much has changed, but certainly that is a very different story in these northern areas.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken paying a visit to Cairo today. Just tell us a little bit about what he's been trying to do there.
What was really being seen before this incident yesterday, or this string of incidents, I should say, was potentially a ceasefire in Gaza would bring about calm in the north between Israel and Hezbollah, but certainly that seems now like a pretty far reach. But that is what the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has really been going for. We're seeing diplomacy in overdrive. He's just held a presser in Cairo, and he denied that the United States had any prior knowledge of this attack. Now, there are reports in US media that Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, that he called his US counterpart Lloyd Austin very soon before this attack, didn't give any specifics, but we do know that the Secretary of State, he did come out in this press conference to deny that the US had any prior knowledge of this. Now, in terms of this ceasefire, it's really looking like this is not going to sort of take any form over the next short period of time. We do understand that both Israel and Hamas, they've agreed to some 15 of these 18 paragraphs. It does remain unclear what the unagreed upon paragraphs are, but what we do need to remember here is this main sticking point that we've been seeing for these past few months, and that is Israel's control over the Philadelphia corridor, that very narrow strip of land that divides Egypt and Gaza. And this is an area that the Israeli military establishment has been saying, as well as the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that it will not relinquish control over, saying that this could then see weapons smuggling from Egypt into Gaza. But we did also hear from the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. He said, and his foreign minister, that there's absolutely no way that Egypt will accept anything but a complete Israeli withdrawal from the corridor.
OK, we leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for that update. Our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates, thank you very much indeed. Now, very quickly, after those attacks in Lebanon on Tuesday, horrific images emerged from the hospitals that were treating the thousands of injured people, and those hospitals appear to be completely overwhelmed. Well, for more on this, we can cross to Oxford and we can speak to Dr. Nick Maynard, a surgeon who makes regular trips to Gaza to carry out emergency procedures. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. From your extensive hands-on experience operating on patients who've been affected by bombings and similar types of injury, how does a hospital cope with such a sudden influx of injured people?
Thank you very much for asking me on today. In short, with great difficulty, even when hospitals are in areas which are used to violence, no hospital is ever fully equipped to take on mass casualties like that. And to deal with a huge influx, many dozens sometimes, if not more than that, of acutely injured patients, totally saturates the ability of the hospital to deal with it, really. And even the whole triage process, the process of prioritisation of injuries, becomes extremely difficult to do with such mass casualties. So it is extremely difficult for really any hospital in the world to cope with that.
Indeed. I mean, one would assume as well that when a child comes into a hospital injured in a situation like that, they'd go to the front of the queue, but there could be other children in front of them. I mean, it sounds like absolutely mission impossible.
It is. I mean, and I experienced this on many occasions in my time in Gaza since October the 7th last year. Literally, I mean, with all these patients arriving, there aren't enough doctors and nurses on duty to deal with them. There aren't enough people to really prioritise them. So you will get, as you describe, many children coming in with, traumatic amputations of their limbs, people coming in with shrapnel injuries, and the sort of injuries these patients have received in Lebanon will be very similar to the shrapnel injuries that bomb victims get. And they can have multiple injuries involving the chest, involving the abdomen, involving the limbs. And they'll be bleeding heavily, so they're going to need emergency treatment. And it's extremely difficult to triage them properly and to make sure they all get appropriately quick treatment.
And it must be really adding to the complication. This variety of injuries you described. Some hospitals will have an expertise and a specialisation in one field. Others will have specialisation in another. And if you've got people with multiple injuries, it doesn't even... It's impossible to compute how a hospital would determine how it's going to treat people in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I imagine the patients are all going to acute hospitals which regularly do receive acute injuries and illnesses, and they will have the sort of hospitals that I'm used to working in the West will have a major disaster protocol, which will be a really robust protocol to draw in all available doctors. But that sort of protocol is initiated, for example, in Oxford, when you might have a dozen injuries coming in. I think the scale that we're seeing in Lebanon and the scale that we saw in Gaza is far, far greater than that. And they will have doctors from different specialists, but they simply won't have enough. It'll be the sheer volume that makes it so difficult.
I don't know if you had a chance to see some of the pictures of people there in Lebanon. I saw some last night circulating on social media, really gruesome pictures, people bloodied from head to toe with severe injuries, young, old, male, female, young, old. As I said, I mean, when you look at the variety of injuries, really severe injuries in some cases, hands, eyes, legs, I mean, what kind of a future do people face if they've got injuries of that degree of seriousness?
Yeah, very, very tough futures. And of course, you'll see, I saw quite a few of the photos, and you see some of the very obvious injuries, the severe limb injuries, the eye injuries. The most common type of injury will be the limb injuries, and we saw huge numbers of those when I was in Gaza. And they'll be devastating because some of the children and young adults will be losing limbs, and of course there's all the rehabilitation that goes with that. And many of these countries, certainly in Gaza, I don't know so much about Lebanon, but certainly in Gaza, the ability to rehabilitate these patients is very, very limited. But there's also the so-called hidden injuries that there won't be immediately obvious, the severe injuries to the abdomen and to the chest. And these are very typical shrapnel injuries where very, very small pieces of metal or stone or plastic from the pages will be slicing through the abdomen and the chest and causing a huge amount of internal damage to all the different organs in the abdomen and the chest. And initially they're hidden injuries because you don't know they're there, because the entry point may be only a few millimeters wide, but they can cause enormous amount of damage. So yes, I think what we've seen so far may just be the tip of the. There may be far more injuries than we're actually seeing.
Yeah, in fact, the numbers of injured have varied enormously, varying from one source to another. And of course, another hidden injury will be the psychological trauma, or for example, children in particular will have endured. Just going back to the hospitals, I mean, what sort of supplies will they be particularly short of in a sudden, unexpected emergency situation like this one? I mean, we've seen pictures of people queuing up, donating blood. Is that helpful?
Yeah, most certainly. And again, I don't know the Lebanese hospitals. I don't know how well resourced they are to start with. But the sheer volume of injuries coming in will rapidly deplete all the stores they have, particularly blood products. That's almost always the thing that goes first when there's a lot of injured patients. So giving blood or other blood products to save these lives will be very difficult. So there'll be a rapid call for emergency blood donors to come along and donate blood and other blood products so they can save these patients. But the other equipment, the intravenous fluids, the equipment for theatres can become rapidly depleted unless they've got good stores. And of course, this was a major problem that we saw in Gaza because there's been so little aid getting into Gaza that the stores were already almost empty. And then when you then got a mass casualty and dozens, if not up to 100 or 2 casualties coming in 24 hours, there were no resources to treat them. And that will rapidly become a problem in Lebanese hospitals if there is such a great volume of trauma victims coming in.
And then there's the decision-making that the doctors are having to make under enormous pressure, probably on, by this stage, very little sleep, in zero sleep, I'd imagine, for some doctors who've probably been working solidly for 36 hours, or 24 hours at least. When they're having to make sudden decisions and emergency decisions, they're not necessarily going to be the best decisions, are they, for the patient? They're just in the interest of perhaps saving the patient's life. But does that mean that perhaps more people will be amputated in a situation like this because it's either that or the patient's life is in danger? Is that part of the risk of operating under these kinds of pressures?
I guess there's always a risk of that, but these will be very well-trained doctors who are used to dealing with very sick and urgent patients. Now, of course, as I've said repeatedly, the volume will be a huge challenge, but they'll be very well trained, I'm sure, in making very quick, rapid, urgent, and often life-saving decisions. So I'm sure, and yes, even when you're very busy, even when you've been operating for long hours, that ability, when you're well trained, almost becomes second nature. Eventually, the tiredness and the lack of sleep will have an impact, but I suspect they're very well trained, very used to doing this. And although they are very rapid decisions to be made, for someone who's doing it regularly, they're usually pretty straightforward decisions, very important decisions, but usually straightforward. And of course, there'll be, when the decisions might be difficult, they will call upon other colleagues who are equally experienced to share the decision making.
Let's just talk a bit about your experience in the field and operating in dangerous situations like Gaza. Just tell us a bit about that. And, for example, what goes through your mind when you're working in a place like that where your own life is in danger as well as that of the patient?
I mean, to say it's a challenging place to work is a huge understatement. I've been going to Gaza since 2010, so I've had many visits there before October the 7th. I've taught out there, I've operated out there, and carrying out, I mean, I'm a cancer surgeon, so I was helping them develop their cancer surgery services in Gaza, and it's always been very challenging working in Gaza because of the lack of resources, but it's the conditions one was used to. But since October the 7th, the challenges just became enormous, and I alluded a little bit to it, very little resources, fear that the hospital itself will be attacked. We were reassured at the beginning that the deconfliction process whereby the hospitals were protected would be sacrosanct, but of course that's not been the case on many occasions in Gaza. I was working at Al-Aqsa Hospital, and I will remember the day on January the 5th, earlier this year, my first visit to Gaza. I've been there since, my first visit since October the 7th, and I was operating in Al-Aqsa Hospital, and there was an Israeli missile attack on the intensive care unit whilst I was in the operating theatre, and you could hear the bombs going off. So it's very frightening at the time. You have to concentrate on the job in hand. You have to carry on doing the life-saving operation you're doing, but it really makes you very concerned about working again in those circumstances. We had to evacuate. All the foreign doctors had to evacuate from Al-Aqsa Hospital immediately after that missile attack because, of course, it wasn't safe. But we went back again a few weeks later, knowing that threat was there, but knowing that our help was so essential that the need to go there really dwarfed. It didn't completely negate any fear. We were very aware of safety issues, but we felt a great need to go out there and continue our help.
Yeah, but I just want to, understand a little bit more about what motivates you to go to a place where you are so very much in danger. What goes through your mind?
Well, I can tell you what motivates me is my many years of experience of going to Gaza, loving the place, but most importantly, loving the people there. And I've made many very close friends, people I would call my family, who I've known for many years. And I spoke to them regularly straight after October the 7th, when all the atrocities started after then. And it was very clear to me they needed help. And when people who've been close friends for many years asked for your help, I felt obliged to go out there and help them, despite the risks to personal safety.
And as you said, you're an oncologist, a cancer surgeon, and presumably you're having to do a whole variety of different types of surgery as well as per requirements of the people coming into the hospitals? Is it very difficult to adapt from one type of surgery to another?
It's a very good question, that. I mean, in many ways, the last thing they need in Gaza at the moment, tragically, is highly specialised cancer surgery. They need people to do trauma. So I am a cancer surgeon, but I've been for many years, decades, I've been operating routinely on the abdomen and the chest, doing mainly cancer surgery. And the surgery I was doing was for trauma, but it was still major abdominal and thoracic surgery. So I was operating in areas I've been used to operating in for many years. And although we were dealing with trauma rather than cancer, it's not dissimilar surgery. We're operating on the same organs. But we were working in conjunction with the local surgeons, who, of course, are very experienced trauma surgeons. So we had a sort of very symbiotic relationship that we often operated together, and they were the more experienced emergency trauma surgeons, but I would be able to help with the more complex damaged organs, which I was used to operating on for cancer. So I think we all learned from each other very rapidly.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on Al Arabiya. Dr. Nick Maynard, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Cairo today, where he held talks with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as well as reaffirming his commitment to a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. He told reporters that the US had no prior knowledge of Tuesday's deadly attack, which targeted those pages used by Hezbollah.
With regard to Lebanon, the United States did not know about, nor was it involved in these incidents, and we're still gathering the information and gathering the facts. Broadly speaking, we've been very clear, and we remain very clear, about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza, to see it spread to other fronts. It's clearly not in the interest of anyone involved to see that happen, and that's why, again, it's imperative that all parties refrain from any actions that could escalate the conflict.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking there in Cairo earlier today. Well, let's cross to Washington. We can speak to our correspondent there, Benji Haya. Benji, thanks for joining us. What have we been hearing from DC in the last 24 hours with regards to developments in Lebanon?
Well, frankly, in terms of official on-the-record statements, like we heard there from Antony Blinken, not much. It has been the Secretary of State who has been making the comments that have dictated the US position on this so far. You heard them there. Again, a regular call that we've heard from Washington to try to de-escalate tensions in the region, following the escalation that we've seen between Israel and Hezbollah, following, of course, that war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza that is ongoing. I think the main takeaway being that the United States was not informed of this by Israel, assuming that this was conducted by Israel. Israel have not confirmed or denied either way. The United States was not informed beforehand of this and was not involved in any sort of way. There has been, over the past 24 hours, some fresh reporting about how exactly this might have been conducted, with malware tampered with in the pages before they were shipped towards Lebanon. But the United States saying that they were not informed of that and that they were not involved. Of course, the calls from the US continue to be to try to seek out a ceasefire in Gaza, which could in turn try to de-escalate those tensions that we're seeing also on the border between Israel and Hezbollah. But incidents like this make that target seem even more elusive.
Yeah, so what you're saying is Washington pretty much taken as much by surprise as the rest of the world by Tuesday's events. And this is perhaps just another example, isn't it, of cases we've seen in recent months and weeks, US officials expressing quite serious frustration with Israel.
I think so. I mean, that has been hinted upon even from the early days of the conflict that President Joe Biden, for example, has felt uneasy about the way in which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has conducted the war in Gaza. There have been ongoing conversations, it's worth saying, between officials here and those in Jerusalem. In fact, one of the Biden administration's most senior officials has been in Israel in past days, as he's done for quite a while now, in order to try to keep that dialogue open. Antony Blinken, of course, in Egypt. Those efforts to try to seek a ceasefire are ongoing. We're told also that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant spoke with US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin just before the explosions, but again, no details shared between the two. So clearly an attempt to still keep the United States within the loop, but it seems as if Israel is acting independently of their main arms backer on both fronts, in Gaza and in Lebanon, and clearly have not managed to heed those calls for a de-escalation, despite pressure internally in Israel from many to push towards a ceasefire agreement.
Now, there are some analysts out there saying there could be a message in all of this for the United States from Israel, namely, get Hezbollah to stand down. Otherwise, Israel really will turn this into that full-scale regional war that nobody wants. What do you make of that reading?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? We've got to kind of sense the tea leaves here and ultimately just speculate, because there's been no official confirmation from Israel either way about what their motivations could be. Again, assuming that they were the actor behind this attack. I mean, there are various ways to assess what might have driven Israel towards conducting this operation through the pager technology. One is to actually just give a warning towards Hezbollah, either in advance of a even more serious Israeli attack, try to dent Hezbollah's ability to respond, taking out a lot of their fighters, for example, a lot of their communication. It could be also to try to stop an impending Hezbollah attack that Israeli intelligence might have sensed, or it might have been, as you mentioned, to send a message to another party, be it Hamas in Gaza, saying we have eyes and ears everywhere, we are fully aware, don't try anything, or also to put the pressure on, for example, Washington to try to play an even greater part in pushing Hezbollah to stand down. Now, that would be an interesting one, given the United States has for a long time condemned Hezbollah's actions, condemned Iran. It even helped it step in to prevent the full scale of atrocities that could have happened. If you recall months ago when Iran launched those barrel of rockets towards Israel. So the United States has been involved in trying to stop much of the destruction that could have been caused by Iran or its militias in the region that it backs. But ultimately, Israel may feel that it wants it to go even further, meaning Antony Blinken and, of course, whoever wins the presidential election in November seriously has their work cut out.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the election in just a second, because I wanted to ask you how this is playing out. But I just wanted to bring our viewers up to speed with the news that there has been another wave of attacks today, Wednesday, in Lebanon. Hezbollah saying that some other handheld devices, possibly walkie-talkies as well, have been exploding. So that's and it's understood that those were devices purchased around the same time as the pagers that exploded on Tuesday. So clearly things are far from calming down, and things seem to be escalating. Just going back to the elections in the United States, Benji, I mean, we've got this looming election in less than 2 months from now, and I'm just wondering whether events in Lebanon have been mentioned by either of the candidates.
Well, it's an interesting election on many fronts. I mean, what we've seen over the past 2 months, for example, has been unprecedented in the United States in terms of the changing events in this campaign. Normally, in the United States, when it comes to the vote, foreign policy issues don't take precedent. It is normally about domestic affairs, the economy, immigration. But certainly the events we've seen in Israel have certainly played a part in how many voters feel about both candidates. Now, we haven't heard directly from either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris on the most recent events, although, of course, now that they're escalating, and you mentioned the most recent development happening today, it may create a sense that there should be comment from either candidate, and there may be more opportunities today for them to do that, given they're both back on the campaign trail. There'll be an awareness on both fronts, one that they need to try to create a narrative that is attractive to voters on both sides. You know, Kamala Harris has to toe a very careful line between appeasing many Americans who are still pro-Israel, and she says that she has unwavering support for the Jewish homeland, versus also sympathizing with the views of those who are pro-Palestinian, and she has urged more help for the Palestinian cause, and again, as with her boss, President Joe Biden, called for a ceasefire. President Joe Biden's rhetoric quite different, saying that Israel must finish the job in Gaza. So that's on the campaign front. But I think there'll also be awareness that ultimately when they take office, either of them in January 2025, that they will inherit this increased volatility in the Middle East. It is now increasingly unlikely that we'll see any ceasefire agreement before the presidential election in November. So as I said before, they've certainly got their work cut out when they take the top job in the White House.
OK, Benji Hire in Washington, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest. Now, Israel hasn't commented on this operation, which caused thousands of pages and walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon to explode, nor has Israel claimed a responsibility. What we do know is that Israel has a secretive cyber warfare unit known as Unit 8200. So did they have a role in this attack? Well, for more, I'm joined by the former IDF Deputy Director of Military Intelligence, now Senior Researcher at the Institute of National Security Studies at Tel Aviv University, retired Brigadier General Dr. Meir Elran. Thank you so much for joining us. No doubt in anyone's mind that this was an Israeli operation. Is that a fair assumption?
I think it's fair, yeah.
What's making you say that?
Well, I don't know for sure that this is Israel, but the context, the situation right now in the Middle East, and the capacities, the magnificent capacities of the Israeli intelligence community are quite evident in what happened yesterday. And who knows, maybe also regarding what's happening today, because I hear that there are further blasts in Lebanon in various places, in communication systems. So maybe it's an ongoing thing. I don't have any information about the details, unfortunately.
Yeah, some analysts saying this bears all the hallmarks of a Mossad operation. And could it be a Mossad operation in conjunction with that mysterious unit, Unit 8200?
Well, let me put it this way. The military intelligence unit 8200 is not mysterious. It's a well-known, it's the largest Israeli military organization. And everybody knows about that. I mean, this particular unit is responsible, I would say, for the magic development of technical capacities in Israel. The startup nation actually started at age 200. And so this is a long history. The capacities of this particular unit is developing all the time. But I must add again that as far as I understand, this was mostly a Mossad enterprise, even though the Mossad and the Shin Bet and the other parts of the community, of the intelligence community, are well known for their very close and intimate collaboration. So maybe it was the co-production of more than one unit in the IDF and in Israel in general.
And does all of this suggest to you that there's at least one weak link in the chain in terms of the Hezbollah chain of command, i.e. Hezbollah's got some leaks?
Well, let me put it this way. There are lots of faults in any systems chain, and Hezbollah is not immune from failures. As a matter of fact, they have shown recently a high level of self-confidence and assurance, and I think it was not really well-based. And luckily, Israelis and the military in Israel is capable of monitoring their weaknesses, their pitfalls, their issues, and to challenge their overall machinery. And this is what's happening right now. It's not only a military combat, it's also a minds combat. And in this respect, I think that we are in good shape, especially when it comes to technologies and capacities to implement, the highest level of technologies to get the accomplishments that we need to have.
Yeah, so the psychological dimension that you alluded to there is basically this message to Hezbollah and anyone who sympathizes with them that there's nowhere to run. They're not safe anywhere. Do you think that sums it up?
Well, this is absolutely true. The psychological component of all that is very, very significant. But you have to understand that when you are in a situation of war, the two sides are having issues with their psychological situation. I must say that I'm quite content with the fact that, there is confusion and a chaotic kind of an atmosphere within the echelons of Hezbollah, and unfortunately also in Lebanon at large. But I must tell you, we are engaged as Israelis for the last year with a major, war with not only with Gaza, with the Palestinians, with the terrorist organization of Hamas, but also with Hezbollah. And unfortunately, this goes on, and there are also repercussions with regard to the Israelis on our side of you have to remember that the situation is quite dire on our side as well. We have also our own psychological problem or political problems or whatever you want to call them. The fact of the matter is that because of the war, tens of thousands of people had to be evacuated from their homes alongside the border with Lebanon. This is a major problem that we have to solve, and the sooner the better. We need to bring our people back safely to where they belong. And I think that the most important thing, and this is really the strategic context, is that this war has to end, and not only in Lebanon, but also in Gaza, in such a way that we will be able to bring back some kind of a stability to the region and to start reconstructing this whole element. I mean, war is not something that we're looking for. The whole thing was enforced upon us in a very brutal manner by Hamas, and then Hezbollah joined in, and we are responding to the challenge as best as we can. And we have also our problems, and our needs and our interest, of course, is to bring this war to an end as soon as possible.
I mean, just looking at it from the Israeli point of view, we've got a situation where Hezbollah has been humiliated to a certain extent, weakened. They've got no line of communication, that we know of. One of their major lines of communication has now been destroyed. Do you think that there is an element there in Israel that's thinking perhaps this is the ideal moment to strike a fatal blow to Hezbollah? Do you think that could be a calculation that is being made right now?
Well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you that Israel has good reasons, and I try to explain that in my last sentences. We have good reasons to bring about a major change in the situation on the border between Israel and Lebanon. The Hezbollah started the day after the brutal attack of the Hamas They started in a war of attrition against Israel, which goes on now for 11 and a half months. Consequently, our tens of thousands of our inhabitants in the northern part of Israel had to be evacuated and are basically now displaced from their homes for a long period of time, which is a major distress for them and for the country as a whole. And we need to bring them back. And we, of course, and I think we prefer to have a diplomatic way to bring this about. We have tried, together with our American allies, to bring about some kind of an arrangement with Hezbollah or with Lebanon to restore some kind of a construct that will enable people to come back safely. This has been also declared by the government 2 days ago to be a major goal of the present war, which was not the case before. It was not declared before as a thing that has to be done. So this is clearly an interest on the part of Israel. If we can manage, together with our American allies, and they are working very hard to achieve this kind of a situation, if we are successful and some kind of a new arrangement will be agreed upon, I will be very happy. And then we will be able to restore the, to bring back the people to their homes. If not, unfortunately, and I stress the word unfortunately, we'll have to resort to the other more physical or military means. I think that Israel has the capacities to do that. I think that Israel will be able to do that. I think that Israel is ready to that. Lots of people in Israel are for that. People are saying that there is no way for us to continue with this dire situation in the northern part of the country. So, absolutely, this is definitely an option. Either if the the political diplomatic negotiations are being coming to a dead end, or another thing is, of course, through some kind of a military escalation or deterioration of the military situation between Israel and Hezbollah. This is definitely another possibility, quite possible. And then, of course, we'll find ourselves, perhaps even very, very soon, in a full war situation with Hezbollah. I don't think that it's a great idea. I don't think that wars are something that to be cherished, to look for. And I think that it will be bad for Lebanon, for Hezbollah, and for us as well. But if we don't have any choice, we have to get out of this situation in which we are deadlocked in, and it has to be changed in a major way, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, that echoes really what the Jerusalem Post said in one of its commentaries today, saying that these attacks in Lebanon show there's been a shift in Israeli strategy towards Hezbollah. And so what you're saying is basically we're starting to see some signs of that new strategy right now.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would connect what happened yesterday and what is apparently happening also today, specifically to a major shift in the Israeli policy with regard to the Lebanese arena. I think I have explained the context, the strategic situation in the northern part of Israel, the fact that there is a war of attrition being waged against us for 11 and a half months. This has to change. And of course, the first priority in the first stages of the war was directed towards the Gaza Strip. Now that the Gaza Strip has been practically taken over by the IDF, and we still have lots of things to do to terminate the goals, but basically it has been achieved. Of course, now it's time for us to understand and to decide what is the best situation and what are the best circumstances for us to push forward to a reconstruction of the situation in the north. And as I said before, either in a political way, a diplomatic way, or by military force. And I just read today that Israel is starting, or the IDF is starting to shift major forces from the Gaza Strip apparently to the northern front. And this might be an indication that Israel is preparing itself very, very seriously to an eventuality that might happen sometime in the near future, either because of a deterioration or because of some other circumstances. And then we will be ready to do what has to be done. And I'm sure that we will do it in the best way possible.
I just want to ask your opinion on something one of our earlier guests was saying, which was that this attack was carried out by Israel when it was, i.e. Yesterday and today, because word had got out, or there was a risk that word was about to get out, that these devices had been modified in such a way that they'd explode, and therefore expedited the whole operation. Do you think there's any truth in those reports?
I want to stress that I don't know for a fact that this is the situation, but more and more sources, some of them credible, allude to this option. I mean, things like that do happen. Apparently, as I read, it was a result of some indications monitored by Hezbollah that something is wrong with the pages. And then the problem was that this whole operation, or this whole potential operation or prepared operation, could have been lost. And then possibly, again, I don't know whether that's the case or not, a decision has been taken to expedite and to carry out this simultaneous blast, which is important by itself. I mean, as we have discussed already, I mean, there are very, very important outcomes to what happened yesterday, as far as Israel is concerned. This leaves the question of the strategic context open for discussion and for speculations. Let's put it this way. Right now, we don't know that Israel did that. We don't know that it was decided to do it as a preliminary stage to a full-fledged attack. And we don't know so many other things. What will be the nature and kind, scale and length of this kind of an operation, if at all it comes in. And so this is what I can say right now. I think that Israel should be ready. I think that Israel is ready, and the IDF will do the best job once it is called to do that. By the
All right. Thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Meir Elran, thank you very much indeed to you.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews and debates. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation. From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
In a journey that is rich in its content and substantiated by its details, from primitive cave drawings to the engraving of letters on stones, it set out writing was invented, and the alphabet shortly followed. And is the case in all journeys. What is new is the title. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. The first calligraphers excelled in their precision and artwork skills. They added diacritics, and with ink and tools they wrote it all out, and they decorated them with their motifs. These are the messages of light, passed on through the history of Arab manuscripts. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. When you have the opportunity to handle a manuscript, you'll begin to wonder, how were these papers made? How were all these manuscripts written and duplicated? How did they last long enough to reach us in a state of fine quality, grace, and elegance? They bear the history of the Arabs, preserving their intellectual prowess in all the fields of knowledge. All of this confirms the importance of Arab manuscripts and reflects how skillful and capable ancient Arab manufacturing had become. The manuscript industry was based on four main pillars. The appearance and material the paper was made of was the first and most important pillar, especially paper that was made from papyrus plant, and parchment that was made from animal skin, and paper that was made of linen and hemp. The second of these pillars was the ink and midad that was used, and the various colors that were selected. The third pillar was the pen that was used, which included the associated tools and calligraphy methods that were used. Binding was the fourth and final pillar in the production of an Arab manuscript. Sources make varying claims regarding the kind of paper used in manufacturing manuscripts. It mostly depends on the raw material that the paper was made of. Besides parchment, papyrus was widespread, and it reigned supreme for an extended period of time until paper, or al-kaghid, was invented and was deemed a fierce competitor to them. It reached its zenith in the middle of the 5th century Hijri. It replaced papyrus, and the printing presses that began to use paper were more common and prevalent. The Arabs of the pre-Islamic era and Islam were familiar with papyrus, which was known as al-Qaratis. As an important material used for writing, it was even mentioned in their poetry. Tarafa bin al-Abd likened the face of his beloved to al-Qurtas from the Levant, as it is white and pure. Their cheek is similar to al-Qurtas from the Levant, and was encrypted like a Yemeni stone that had not been exposed. Papyrus constituted an important leap in the manuscript industry. It led to developments in the authorship and inscribing processes, and also helped spread information across vast distances because of the advantages this paper had. It was light, non-cumbersome to store and transport, The paper could even be transported through the folds of clothing. The papyrus plant would grow abundantly in the swamps of the river delta in ancient times. The ancient Egyptians benefited from it, and it resulted in the development of one of the most important industries, which are considered one of the greatest accomplishments that Egypt had offered human civilization, that being the paper-making industry. From this papyrus plant, paper is made. It is one of the most important agricultural crops that grew in the swamps of the delta in Egypt. And there are various species of it present in Sudan till this very day. They served many purposes in ancient Egypt, which ranged from making boxes, baskets, and ropes, but its core value lies within its use in making paper. Egypt was considered a center for this important industry, and it began to export a large portion of what they produced to the countries of the ancient world. The papyrus plant is from the sedge family of plants that belongs to the cypress genus and the papyrus species. The word paper is derived from papyrus, and it is what we use in the English language. The length of the papyrus plant ranges from 7 to 10 feet, and it is made of a trisection stem. Its bark is thin and coarse, and a width of a single reed is about 1.5 inches. The reed has a core made of cellular tissue, which paper is made out of. The reed is split into two, and each half is sliced from the center of the stem. The pulp slices are then placed side by side on flat wooden surfaces. A second set of these slices are placed perpendicularly to the first layer, and they are stacked side by side. These slices are then soaked and are gently pressed with pieces of wood until they level out. They are then left to dry in the sun. The end result is a piece of paper ranging in its size from 20 to 30 centimeters in width and 30 to 40 centimeters in length. It is easy to make files of varying lengths out of papyrus. Separate papers are bound together, where they are polished and pasted again until we obtain a roll that can reach 15 meters in length. Only one side of the papyrus would be used for writing, and it would be the side that had fibers that were horizontal, so that the pen that was used would be able to write with little to no resistance. The papyrus roll is then cut up into equal pieces, which are then written on and stacked on top of each other. It is used in corresponding messages, pamphlets, and manuscripts. Everything that nature made available to mankind has been used to aid them. Here we have papyrus paper. Thousands of them are preserved in libraries around the world. The Phoenicians transferred them to people around the world. We have received many letters and instruments that were written and described on papyrus, including papyrus from Hierakonpolis Magna. This papyrus dates back to 22 Hijri. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo has the oldest manuscript that is written on papyrus. This manuscript dates back to 4,500 years ago, and it contains details about the work the builders of the pyramid of the pharaoh Khufu partook in. It was found by a team of French and Egyptian archaeologists in Wadi al-Jarf on the coast of the Red Sea. Unfortunately, only fragments of the early works of Arab manuscripts that were written on papyrus have made their way to us. Among them are Mawti'a Malik bin Anas, the Journal of Humam bin Munabbih, and the Journal of Abdullah bin al-Hayya. The most complete manuscript that has reached us that was written on papyrus is the book titled A Collection of Prophetic Hadiths by Abdullah bin Wahb, who passed away in the year 97 Hijri in the region of Idfu in Upper Egypt, and it is now preserved in the Egyptian National Library. The year 323 Hijri witnessed the last known use of papyrus for writing as of now, as that century would be the last to witness the manufacturing of papyrus paper. With these words, we toured around the world of ancient papers, and in our modern times, we witnessed its great legacy, and in the lives of the ancients, it was a point of skill and craftsmanship. Phenomenal human innovation was written down upon their papyri, which still shines on till this very day.